They called her unworthy the night they ripped the crown from her head. Lyra Vale stood in that throne room bleeding from wounds no one could see, while the man she'd loved since childhood chose duty over her beating heart. But here's the thing about women: the world tries to break. Sometimes they don't just survive. They come back blazing with power that makes kings kneel. This is the story of how the girl they threw away became the queen they couldn't destroy. Stick around till the end because this gets wild, and drop a comment with your city name so I know where my pack is watching from. The throne room stank of betrayal and expensive wine. Lyra Vale stood at the center of the polished marble floor, with her hands shaking so badly she had to clench them into fists. Around her, hundreds of wolves from every major pack in the kingdom watched with eyes that gleamed like broken glass in the torchlight. She could smell their anticipation, thick and rotten as spoiled meat. They wanted blood. Not the literal kind, though some of them wouldn't have minded that either, but the social execution that was about to unfold. Alpha King Rowan Draven sat on his throne like a man carved from ice. He wouldn't look at her. That was the part that made Lyra's chest feel like it was caving in on itself. She'd spent 19 years learning the geography of his face, memorizing every scar and shadow, and now he stared at the far wall like she was something that would disappear if he ignored her long enough. The woman beside him, the pale, delicate wolf princess from the Eastern Highlands, sat with her spine straight and her hands folded. Princess Mira, the political solution, the treaty made flesh. Queen Regent Alara Draven rose from her seat beside the throne with the satisfied smile of a woman who'd just won a war without spilling a drop of blood. Rowan's mother had the kind of beauty that felt dangerous, all sharp cheekbones and calculating eyes. She moved like a blade through water. "Your Majesty," a nobleman called from the gallery. "The charges?" Alara's voice carried across the vast chamber without effort. "Lyra Vale has been found unworthy of the title Luna Queen. She lacks the political connections to secure our borders. She brings no alliance, no treaty, no advantage to the crown. In times of peace, love might be enough, but we stand on the edge of war, and this kingdom needs strength, not sentiment." Lyra felt something crack inside her chest. She'd known this was coming. Rowan had warned her 3 nights ago in whispers that tasted like goodbye. But hearing it spoken aloud in front of the entire assembled nobility made it real in a way that destroyed her. She found her voice, though it came out rougher than she intended. "I've trained my entire life for this. I know every pack law, every tradition, every—" "Tradition doesn't hold borders," Alara cut her off. "Sentiment doesn't stop invasions. You are a wolf of no particular bloodline, no strategic value, and no power base. You are, in every measurable way, a liability this kingdom cannot afford." The word liability hit Lyra like a physical blow. She looked at Rowan, really looked at him, trying to find the man who'd promised her forever beneath a full moon when they were both 16, the man who'd traced the bond mark on her wrist and sworn he'd never let politics touch what they had. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. His hands gripped the armrests of his throne like he was holding himself in place by force, but he still wouldn't meet her eyes. "Say something," Lyra said. Her voice cracked. "Rowan, say something." The silence that followed felt like drowning. A council elder in crimson robes cleared his throat. "The decision has been made, girl. Alpha King Rowan has chosen the path of duty, as all true kings must. You will relinquish your title, your claim, and your residence in the royal palace effective immediately." Lyra's breathing went shallow. "And if I refuse? Then you'll be removed by force and branded an enemy of the crown," Alara said simply. "I suspect you're smarter than that. The trap was perfect. Refuse and become a traitor. Accept and become nothing." Lyra looked around the throne room at faces she'd known for years. Wolves who'd bowed to her, celebrated her, called her Luna to be at every formal gathering. Now they watched her humiliation with the detached interest of people observing a public execution. Not one of them spoke in her defense. She turned back to Rowan. "One last time. Is this what you want?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence of the chamber, everyone heard it. "Look at me and tell me this is what you want." For a moment, just a fraction of a heartbeat, Rowan's eyes met hers. What she saw there wasn't indifference, it was agony. Raw and bleeding and terrible. But beneath that was something worse. Resignation. He'd already made his choice and he was going to live with the wound of it. His voice, when it finally came, sounded like it was being dragged over broken glass. I want my kingdom to survive. Not the same thing, Lyra said. Not even close. But it was the only answer she was going to get. The Keeper of Titles stepped forward with a velvet cushion that held the silver circlet Lyra had worn for the past year, the symbol of her status as Rowan's chosen mate and future queen. She'd put it on the morning after their bonding ceremony, when the whole kingdom had celebrated what they'd called a love match for the ages. Now the Keeper held out his hand expectantly. Lyra reached up with fingers that felt numb and distant, like they belonged to someone else's body. The circlet was warm from her skin. She could feel the delicate wolf engravings under her fingertips, the weight of it familiar as breathing. She pulled it off. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, suddenly too heavy, suddenly wrong. She placed the circlet on the velvet cushion and watched the torchlight dance across the silver. The Keeper turned and presented it to Princess Mira. The Eastern Princess took it with a small, polite smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes, and placed it on her own head. It sat there like it had always belonged to her, like the past year of Lyra's life had been nothing but a placeholder. The crowd murmured approval. Lyra felt bile rise in her throat. By order of the crown, Elara declared, Lyra Vale is hereby stripped of all titles, privileges, and protections afforded to the royal consort. She is to vacate the palace grounds before dawn. Any wolf who offers her shelter within the capital territories will be charged with treason. The words kept coming, formal and efficient, dismantling Lyra's entire existence piece by piece. She stopped listening. It didn't matter anymore. They'd already taken everything that counted. She turned to leave. Her legs felt like they might give out, but she forced them to move. One step, then another. The crowd parted in front of her like she carried a disease. No one met her eyes. No one spoke. She was halfway to the massive double doors when she heard it. Lyra. Rowan's voice. Quiet enough that maybe only she and the wolves closest to the throne could hear it. She stopped, but didn't turn around. I'm sorry. 2 words. Worthless as ashes. Lyra's hands curled into fists at her sides. Her nails bit into her palms hard enough to draw blood. She could feel the bond between them, the soul-deep connection that marked them as true mates, pulling tight as a wire about to snap. When she spoke, her voice was steady as stone. No, you're not. Not yet. But you will be. Then she walked out of the throne room with her spine straight and her head high, even though inside she was screaming. The palace halls were empty this time of night. Lyra moved through them like a ghost, her footsteps echoing off marble that had cost more than most wolves earned in a lifetime. She'd walked these corridors every day for a year, learning their turns and secrets, making them home. Now they felt like a museum dedicated to someone else's life. Her quarters, former quarters, were in the East Wing, 3 floors up. She took the servants' stairs because she couldn't stomach the idea of running into anyone who might offer her pity, or worse, satisfaction. The door to her rooms was still unlocked. No one had bothered to change that yet. Inside, everything looked exactly as she'd left it that morning when she'd dressed for what she'd thought was just another formal dinner. Her books were stacked beside the reading chair. Her training clothes were folded on the dresser. The curtains she'd chosen herself because they reminded her of morning light were still open to the night sky. It all belonged to a person who didn't exist anymore. Lyra grabbed the leather pack she used for hunting trips and started throwing things into it. Practical items only. A change of clothes. Her father's knife. The only thing she had left of him. The silver chain her mother had given her before the fever took her. She was halfway through packing when she caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked like hell. Her dark hair was a mess around her shoulders. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She was too angry to cry, or maybe too numb. The formal dress she'd worn to the ceremony was deep blue silk that probably cost more than the average pack wolf made in a month, and it suddenly felt obscene against her skin. She ripped it off. Underneath, her body was marked with scars from years of training. Lyra had never been delicate or decorative. She'd earned her place beside Rowan the hard way, learning to fight and hunt and lead. She'd thought that meant something. She'd thought strength and loyalty and love would be enough. She'd been wrong. She dressed in travel clothes, dark pants, a worn shirt, boots made for distance, and tied her hair back with brutal efficiency. When she looked in the mirror again, she saw someone who might survive this. Maybe. A knock on the door made her freeze. For one stupid, treacherous second, she thought it might be Rowan. That he'd come to his senses and run after her and told his mother and the council and the entire political machine to go to hell because love was worth more than treaties. She opened the door. It was Marcus, the head of the royal guard. He stood in the hallway with his helmet under one arm and an expression that looked like he'd been chewing glass. "You're supposed to be gone by dawn," he said quietly. "That gives you maybe 4 hours." "I know." Marcus had trained her himself when she'd first come to the palace. He was one of the few wolves who'd treated her like she belonged instead of like she was playing dress-up in borrowed power. He glanced down the hallway, then back at her. "I'm not supposed to tell you this." "Then don't," Lyra said. She didn't want his pity either. The Queen Regent has wolves watching the main roads out of the capital. They're under orders to make sure you don't just leave. They're supposed to make sure you understand what happens to wolves who aim above their station. It took Lyra a moment to understand what he was saying. When she did, ice flooded her veins. "You're telling me they're going to kill me." Marcus's silence was answer enough. Something shifted in Lyra's chest. The numbness cracked, and underneath it was something hot and vicious. They were going to execute her quietly on some dark road and call it an accident or banditry, or just another sad story about a girl who didn't know her place. Alara wasn't just removing her, she was erasing her. "There's a supply route through the Eastern Market," Marcus continued. "It leads to the lower districts and then out past the farmlands. If you move fast and keep your head down, you might make it to the forest border before they realize you're not using the main roads." "Why are you helping me?" "Because I've watched kings make a lot of stupid decisions in my life," Marcus said. "This one's going to haunt him. Might as well make sure you're alive to see it." Lyra grabbed her pack and slung it over her shoulder. "If they ask—" "They won't have to," Marcus interrupted. "I'll tell them I escorted you to the north gate like I was ordered. What happens after that isn't my concern." He stepped aside to let her pass. Lyra paused in the doorway. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Marcus said. "Just run." But the Eastern Market was deserted this time of night. All the stalls shuttered and locked. Lyra moved through the narrow streets with her hood up and her senses stretched thin. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every distant sound made her hand drop to the knife at her belt. She was 3 blocks from the lower district checkpoint when she smelled them. Wolves. At least 4, moving in a pattern that was too coordinated to be random. They were hunting. Hunting her. Lyra pressed herself into a doorway and controlled her breathing. The bond mark on her wrist, the silver crescent that marked her as Rowan's true mate, pulsed against her skin. She could feel him through it, distant and aching, probably still sitting on that throne and hating himself. "Good," she thought viciously. "I hope it destroys you." The wolves passed within 20 feet of her hiding spot. She recognized one of them, Garrett, a royal enforcer who'd always looked at her like she was something he'd scraped off his boot. He was tracking her scent, following the path she'd taken from the palace. She waited until they'd moved past, then slipped deeper into the maze of back alleys. The lower districts were rougher territory. This was where the pack wolves who didn't have connections or noble blood lived, crammed into buildings that leaned against each other like they were too tired to stand alone. Lyra had visited these streets exactly once during her time at the palace. A formal charity appearance that Alara had arranged to make her look compassionate. Now she was going to disappear into them. She found the supply route Marcus had mentioned, a service road that ran behind the warehouses and merchant storage buildings. It was narrow and dark and stank of garbage, but it led in the right direction. She was halfway down it when someone grabbed her from behind. An arm locked around her throat, hot breath against her ear. "I knew you'd run," a voice hissed. "The Queen said you were predictable." Lyra drove her elbow backward into soft flesh and felt the grip loosen. She spun, yanking the knife from her belt, and came face to face with a wolf she didn't recognize. Young, maybe 20, with the kind of eager cruelty in his eyes that came from wanting to prove himself. He had a blade too, longer than hers. "The Queen wants you gone quiet," he said, but she didn't say it had to be painless. He lunged. Lyra sidestepped and let his momentum carry him past her. She slashed at his arm as he went by, opening a line of red across his forearm. He snarled and came at her again, faster this time, and she barely got her knife up in time to deflect the strike aimed at her throat. They fought in near silence, just the sound of steel on steel and ragged breathing. He was stronger, but she was better trained. Marcus had made sure of that. She waited for an opening. When it came, his weight shifted wrong, his guard dropped just slightly. She drove her knee into his stomach and brought the pommel of her knife down on the back of his skull as he doubled over. He went down hard. Lyra stood over him, breathing heavy, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could kill him. Should kill him, probably. He would have done it to her without hesitation. But she wasn't that person yet. She grabbed his blade and threw it into the darkness where he wouldn't find it quickly, then started running again. By the time she reached the forest border, the sky was starting to lighten. Dawn came fast this time of year. Behind her, the capital city of the Wolf Kingdom spread across the valley like a jewel made of stone and ambition. Somewhere in there, Rowan was waking up beside his new political bride. Somewhere in there, Ilara was congratulating herself on a problem solved. And somewhere in those streets, wolves were still hunting for a girl they'd decided didn't deserve to exist. Lyra turned her back on all of it and walked into the trees. The forbidden northern lands waited ahead, dark and wild and full of things that even wolves feared. No one came here by choice. The old stories said the forest was cursed, that it ate travelers and spat out bones, that it was where the moon goddess herself had turned her back on the world. Lyra didn't believe in curses, but as she pushed deeper into the shadows between the trees, feeling the bond mark on her wrist pulse with pain, every step she took away from Rowan, she thought maybe she was about to become one. 3 days into the northern forest, Lyra realized she was being followed. She'd made camp in a clearing near a stream, trying to decide if she was far enough from the capital to risk a fire. Her supplies were running low. The knife wound on her side from the fight 2 nights ago, there had been more hunters, always more hunters, wasn't healing as fast as it should, and something was watching her from the trees, not wolves. The presence felt older than that, stranger. It moved through the forest like wind through leaves, there and gone before she could pin it down. Lyra stood with her hand on her knife and scanned the darkening woods. Show yourself. The silence that followed felt alive. Then a voice, thin as smoke, drifted through the air. You carry the scent of broken bonds and burning bridges, child. What brings a marked wolf to the forgotten places? Lyra's blood went cold. Marked wolves were rare, true mates blessed by the moon goddess herself. The bond between them was supposed to be unbreakable, sacred, eternal. Hers was shattered. I'm just passing through, she said carefully. Liar. The word echoed from multiple directions at once. You're running. But you can't outrun what lives in your blood. A figure stepped from between the trees. She was old, ancient maybe, with silver hair that hung to her waist and eyes that gleamed like winter stars. She wore robes that might have been white once, but were now the color of old bone. Power radiated off her in waves that made Lyra's wolf instincts scream at her to run. The woman smiled. It wasn't comforting. Do you know what you are, child? A wolf who made a mistake, Lyra said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Wrong. The old woman moved closer, her bare feet silent on the forest floor. You're a daughter of the first bloodline, the moon's own Get, cast out and forgotten, when the Pax chose kings over queens, politics over power. That's a story, Lyra said. A myth. Is it? The woman reached out and grabbed Lyra's wrist, the one with the bond mark. Her fingers were cold as ice and strong as iron. Then why does your blood sing even when your bond is broken? Why do you still breathe when your heart wants to stop? Why did you survive every hunter they sent? Lyra tried to pull away. The woman held on. You think you're weak because a boy chose a crown over you, the old woman said. You think you're nothing because they stripped your title and threw you away. But you're standing in the one place no marked wolf has entered in 300 years, and you're still alive. That should tell you something. Like what? That you're not the unworthy one. The woman released her wrist. They are. The words hit Lyra like a physical blow. She'd spent 3 days running, bleeding, barely surviving, and some part of her had believed what Ilara said. That she wasn't enough, wasn't strong enough, connected enough, important enough. The old woman watched her with eyes that saw too much. There's power in your veins that the Pax forgot existed when they started bowing to men in crowns. The moon doesn't choose mates lightly, child. That bond they made you break? It was trying to tell them who you really are. And who's that? Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. Someone who could burn their kingdom to ash if she learned to stop apologizing for taking up space. The forest around them had gone completely silent. No birds, no wind, just the old woman's words hanging in the air like a prophecy. Who are you? Lyra asked. The woman smiled again. I'm what's left of the old ways. Before kings, before kingdoms, before wolves forgot that the moon goddess doesn't crown men, she makes queens. She turned to walk back into the trees. Wait, Lyra called. What am I supposed to do? The old woman paused without turning around. The shadow curse is coming. It will swallow that pretty kingdom of yours within the year. When it does, you'll have a choice. Let them burn, or save the people who tried to destroy you. How do you know about... Because I sent it, the woman said simply. The moon is tired of being forgotten. It's time to remind them what happens when you exile your own divinity. Then she was gone, dissolved into shadow and starlight like she'd never been there at all. Lyra stood alone in the clearing with her heart hammering and her mind racing. The bond mark on her wrist had started to glow, faint silver light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. When she looked down at it, she saw something she'd never noticed before. Beneath the crescent moon mark, barely visible against her skin, were symbols. Old language. Power made manifest. Her blood sang. And in the capital city 3 days' journey south, in a throne room that suddenly felt too small and too cold, Alpha King Rowan Draven sat beside a wife he didn't love and felt the bond he'd broken start to burn like poison in his veins. Lyra didn't sleep that night. She sat with her back against a tree and watched the bond mark on her wrist pulse with silver light that shouldn't exist. Every few minutes, the glow would intensify, then fade, like something was trying to wake up inside her and kept losing the fight. The old woman's words circled in her head like wolves around a kill. Daughter of the first bloodline, the moon's own get, power in your veins. All of it sounded insane, but the mark was glowing, and Lyra had spent enough years learning to trust her instincts to know when reality was shifting under her feet. Something had changed when she crossed into the northern forest. Something fundamental. She pressed her thumb against the mark and felt heat pulse back through her skin. "What are you?" she whispered to it. The forest gave her no answers. By dawn, she'd made a decision. If there was power sleeping in her blood, real power, not the political kind that Alara and the council traded like currency, then she needed to find it. Because the old woman had been right about one thing. A shadow curse was coming. Lyra could feel it in the air, taste it on the wind. Something dark was moving toward the kingdom, and when it arrived, every wolf who'd thrown her away was going to need help they didn't deserve. The question was whether she'd give it to them. Lyra stood and shouldered her pack. The stream she'd camped beside ran deeper into the forest, toward the true north, where even the bravest hunters refused to go. If she was going to find answers about what lived in her veins, that's where they'd be. She started walking. The forest changed as she moved deeper. The trees grew taller, older, their trunks wide as houses, and their branches so thick overhead that sunlight barely penetrated. The air itself felt different here, heavier, charged with something Lyra didn't have a name for. Her wolf senses were going haywire, picking up scents and sounds that didn't make sense. Flowers that shouldn't bloom in this climate. Bird calls from species that went extinct generations ago. This wasn't just forbidden territory. It was wrong territory. A place where the normal rules stopped applying. On the third day of walking, she found the ruins. They rose from the forest floor like broken teeth, massive stone structures half swallowed by moss and vines. What was left of walls suggested buildings that must have been enormous once, maybe temples or palaces. Lyra moved through them carefully, her hand on her knife, trying to piece together what this place had been. Then she saw the murals. They covered the remaining walls in faded paint that had somehow survived centuries of weather. Lyra stood in front of one and felt her breath catch. The images showed wolves, but not like the pack wolves she knew. These were different, larger, more powerful. And above them, rendered in silver that still gleamed despite the age, was a figure that could only be the moon goddess herself. But she wasn't watching over the wolves with benevolent distance like the stories claimed. In these murals, she stood among them, touched them. Her hands were pressed to their chests, and from those points of contact, light spread through their bodies like veins of silver fire. Lyra moved to the next mural. This one showed the blessed wolves, the ones the goddess had touched, standing at the front of what looked like a massive battle. They weren't just fighting, they were commanding. Light poured from their hands, the ground beneath them cracked and reformed. One figure in the center had her arms raised, and the moon itself seemed to be bending toward her. A woman, leading them all. The last mural was damaged, half collapsed into rubble. But what remained showed the blessed wolves kneeling. Not in prayer or reverence, in submission. Standing over them were figures in crowns, kings, and in the background the silver light that had filled the earlier images was fading to gray. This was history the kingdom had erased. The old woman hadn't been lying. There had been a time before kings when wolves who carried the moon's blessing didn't serve. They ruled, and someone had destroyed them for it. Lyra's hands were shaking. She looked down at the bond mark on her wrist, still glowing faintly, and understood what it really meant. This wasn't just a symbol of her connection to Rowan. It was proof of a bloodline the kingdom had spent centuries trying to forget. She was one of them. The blessed, the exiled divinity. You're starting to see it. Lyra spun, knife out, and found the old woman standing in the shadow of a collapsed archway. She looked exactly as she had 3 nights ago, ancient and powerful and completely at ease. "See what?" Lyra demanded. "Why they were so desperate to get rid of you." The old woman moved closer, her bare feet silent on the broken stone. "That bond between you and the king? It wasn't random. The moon doesn't make mistakes. She marked you as his mate because she was trying to put her own blood back on the throne." "Rowan doesn't have the blessing," Lyra said. "No. But you do." The woman stopped a few feet away. "And if you'd married him, your children would have carried it too. Within a generation, the power the kings thought they'd buried would have been back in the royal line. His mother knew it. The moment you showed signs of the old blood waking up, she started planning how to remove you." Lyra's mind raced. She thought back to the past year, all the small comments Alara had made about her lack of political connections, her common bloodline, her unsuitability for the role of Luna Queen. None of it had been about politics. It had been about preventing the return of something they feared. "The treaty was just an excuse," Lyra said slowly. The old woman smiled. "Now you're thinking like someone who understands how power actually works. They had to make it look legitimate, make it seem like duty instead of fear. But the truth is, they saw what you could become and decided to destroy you before you figured it out yourself." Anger burned through Lyra's chest, hot and vicious and clean. She'd spent 3 days running, bleeding, barely surviving, because Alara had been terrified of what she represented. And Rowan had let it happen. He'd sat on that throne and watched them strip her title and exile her, knowing, or at least suspecting, that his mother was trying to bury something bigger than a political inconvenience. He'd chosen the lie over the truth, chosen the crown over what was real. "So what now?" Lyra's voice came out harder than she intended. "You said I had power in my blood. How do I use it?" The old woman's expression shifted. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the question she'd been steering Lyra toward since their first encounter. "You learn," she said simply. "The old ways aren't gone, child. They're just sleeping. And you're going to wake them up." The training started immediately. The old woman, who finally gave her name as Senna, keeper of the forgotten paths, led Lyra deeper into the ruins to a courtyard that had somehow remained intact. Stone benches lined the edges. In the center was a circle carved into the ground, inscribed with symbols that matched the ones on Lyra's bond mark. Senna pointed to the circle. "Stand there." Lyra stepped into it and felt something shift. The air grew heavier. Her skin prickled like she'd walked through a field of static electricity. "The moon's blessing isn't like normal wolf abilities," Senna said. "It doesn't come from your animal nature. It comes from the divine spark the goddess left in certain bloodlines. To access it, you have to stop thinking like a wolf and start thinking like what you really are, which is something closer to her than to them." Senna's eyes gleamed. The Pax forgot this, but the first blessed weren't just wolves who served the moon goddess. They were her children, her power made flesh. When you touch that part of yourself, you're not borrowing strength. You're remembering what you always were. Lyra felt her heartbeat accelerate. "How?" "Close your eyes." She did. Find the bond mark in your mind," Senna instructed. "Not the physical one on your wrist, the one that lives in your chest. The connection that's been broken but won't quite die." Lyra searched inside herself and found it almost immediately. The bond with Rowan was still there, a silver thread that ran from her heart toward the distant capital. It was damaged, fraying, but intact enough that she could feel him on the other end of it. His presence was a weight she'd been carrying since the moment she left. "Now pull on it," Senna said. "What?" "Pull. The bond isn't just a connection, it's a channel. Right now all it does is let you feel his pain and guilt. But if you know how to use it, You can draw power through it. He's a king. He sits on a throne built from the blood of your ancestors. Take back what's yours. Something in Lyra recoiled at the idea. That felt like violation, like theft, like survival, Senna cut into her thoughts. You think he hesitated before taking your title? Your home? Your future? He made a choice, child. You're just living with the consequences. Now decide, are you going to keep bleeding for his guilt, or are you going to use it? Lyra's hands curled into fists at her sides. She thought about standing in that throne room while hundreds of wolves watched her humiliation. Thought about running through dark streets with hunters on her trail. Thought about Rowan sitting beside Princess Mira, wearing the crown he'd chosen over her beating heart. She pulled. The bond flared like a rope catching fire. Power rushed through it, not from Rowan exactly, but from the connection itself, from the divine energy that had bound them in the first place. It poured into Lyra's chest and spread through her veins like liquid silver. Her eyes snapped open. Light was pouring from her hands. Not metaphorical light, actual illumination, bright and cold as moonlight, spilling from her palms and fingers. The symbols carved into the courtyard floor were glowing in response, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Good, Senna said. Now hold it, Lyra tried. The power bucked in her grip like something alive, fighting her control. It wanted to explode outward, to burn through everything in reach. She gritted her teeth and forced it to obey, shaping it with nothing but will and desperation. Her arms were shaking. Sweat ran down her spine. Hold it, Senna repeated. I'm trying. Trying isn't surviving. Hold it or it'll tear you apart. The light flared brighter. Lyra could feel it burning through her, too much power for a body that didn't know how to contain it. Her vision started to blur. Her knees threatened to buckle. Then something shifted inside her. Some instinct older than thought, deeper than training. She stopped fighting the power and instead wrapped herself around it, became the vessel instead of the dam. The light didn't diminish, but it stopped fighting her. It settled. Lyra stood in the center of the courtyard with silver fire dancing across her skin and understood what Senna had been trying to teach her. The power wasn't something to control. It was something to become. When she finally let it fade, she collapsed to her knees, gasping. Senna walked over and looked down at her with something that might have been approval. 20 seconds, she said. Not bad for your first time. By the end of the month, you'll hold it for an hour. Lyra's entire body felt like she'd been struck by lightning. An hour? I can barely stand. Then you'll learn to do it sitting down. Senna offered her a hand. The shadow curse is coming, child. When it arrives, 20 seconds of pretty light won't save anyone. You need to be able to wield this power like breathing, or everyone you're trying to protect will die screaming. Lyra took the offered hand and pulled herself upright. Her legs felt like water, but she stayed standing. Why do you care? She asked. About the kingdom. About me. You said you sent the curse. Why train me to fight it? Because the curse isn't meant to destroy them, Senna said. It's meant to force a reckoning. They'll either remember what they exiled and beg for salvation, or they'll burn in their arrogance. Either way, the moon gets what she wants, acknowledgement or extinction. And me? You're the test. Senna released her hand. If you go back and save them, it means the old blood still cares enough about the Pax to be merciful. If you don't, if you let them burn, then the moon will know her children have truly been lost, and she'll start over with something new. That's insane. That's divinity. Senna smiled without warmth. Gods don't think like wolves, child. They think in centuries and bloodlines and cosmic balance. You're just the piece she's moving on the board. Lyra wanted to argue, to reject the whole twisted logic of it, but she was standing in ancient ruins that proved the kingdom had already betrayed the moon's blessed once before. And she was glowing with power that shouldn't exist, pulled from a bond that was supposed to be broken. Maybe insanity was just truth wearing an unfamiliar face. Fine, she said. Teach me. Senna's smile widened. Again. And this time, hold it for 30 seconds or I'll assume you're not worth the effort. The days blurred together. Lyra trained from dawn until she collapsed, then woke and trained again. Senna was a brutal teacher, offering no comfort and accepting no excuses. When Lyra failed, Senna would simply walk away and leave her lying in the dirt until she found the strength to stand. But slowly, painfully, Lyra learned. She learned to pull power from the bond without it burning through her, learned to shape the silver light into shields, weapons, tools, learned to sense the flow of divine energy in the world around her, The way it pooled in certain places, ran like rivers through others, vanished completely from locations that had been corrupted or forgotten. The ruins became her classroom and her forge. Senna showed her the old combat forms, fighting styles that combined wolf instinct with divine power. Lyra practiced them until her muscles screamed, until the movements became automatic as breathing. She learned to fight with light coating her hands, making every strike hit with the force of a sledgehammer. Learned to move faster than normal wolves, her body enhanced by power that didn't follow physical laws. And every night, when she was too exhausted to move, she felt the bond with Rowan pulse in her chest. He was suffering. She could taste it through the connection, his guilt, his regret, his slowly growing horror at what he'd done. Sometimes she caught flashes of his thoughts, images of her face that he couldn't escape. He was drowning in the consequences of his choice, and some petty part of Lyra was glad. But another part, smaller, quieter, harder to kill, still ached for him. 2 weeks into training, Senna took her to the edge of a cliff that overlooked a valley Lyra had never seen before. The view stretched for miles, showing forests that eventually gave way to grasslands, and then, barely visible in the distance, the familiar mountains that marked the kingdom's northern border. "You're ready for the next lesson," Senna said. Lyra waited. "There are wolves down there." Senna pointed to a spot in the forest below, where smoke rose from what might have been a small settlement. "They're refugees from the southern packs. The curse is spreading faster than I expected, and it's driving wolves out of their territories." "What kind of curse?" Lyra had been so focused on training that she hadn't asked for details. "The kind that twists what you are into, what you fear," Senna said. "It gets inside a wolf's mind and amplifies every dark impulse, every violent thought, every buried hatred. Within days, it turns entire packs into mindless killing machines that tear each other apart. And it's contagious. One infected wolf can spread it to dozens before anyone realizes what's happening." Lyra felt ice spread through her chest. "How many packs have fallen?" "4 that I know of. Probably more by now." Senna turned to look at her. The royal capital is protected by old wards that slow the curse's spread, but the outer territories have no such defenses. By the time it reaches the throne, half the kingdom will be dead or corrupted. And you want me to stop it. I want you to decide if they're worth stopping. Senna gestured toward the valley. "Those refugees down there are the first test. They're terrified, desperate, and some of them are already showing signs of infection. You can go down there and try to heal them. Yes, the blessing can do that. Or you can walk away and let the curse finish what it started." "Why would I walk away?" "Because they're not your people anymore," Senna said bluntly. "You owe them nothing. They stood and watched while you were exiled. Some of them probably cheered. Now they're suffering, and you have the power to help. But using it means risking yourself for wolves who wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire." Lyra stared down at the smoke rising from the valley. Senna was right. These wolves had abandoned her. If their positions were reversed, they wouldn't hesitate to leave her to whatever fate she'd earned. But looking at that smoke, knowing there were families down there huddled together in fear, she couldn't quite convince herself that their cruelty justified hers. Maybe that made her weak. Or maybe it made her different than the people who'd thrown her away. "Show me how to heal them," she said. Senna studied her for a long moment. "You're softer than I hoped. Or harder than you think." Lyra met her gaze. "I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing it because I refuse to let Alara and her politics turn me into something I'm not. She wanted me gone because she was afraid of what I could become. Fine. I'll become it. But on my terms." The old woman's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. "All right then, let's see if you can put that conviction into practice." Ting. The refugee camp was worse than Lyra had expected. 20, maybe 30 wolves living in makeshift shelters built from branches and salvaged cloth. Children crying, adults moving with the jerky, paranoid energy of people who'd seen too much horror and expected more. And underneath it all, the smell of corruption, something rotten and wrong that set Lyra's teeth on edge. They saw her coming and reacted like she was another threat. Men moved to put themselves between her and the children. A woman grabbed a hunting spear and held it with shaking hands. "Stay back," the woman called. "We don't want trouble." Lyra stopped at the edge of the camp with her hands visible and empty. "I'm not here to hurt you. I can help. We don't need help from strangers." The woman's grip on the spear tightened. "Just move on." Senna had stayed behind, claiming this test needed to be Lyra's alone. Now Lyra wished she'd argued harder for backup. These wolves looked one wrong word away from violence. She tried again. I know about the curse. I can remove it. That got their attention. Several wolves exchanged glances. The woman with the spear lowered it slightly but didn't put it down. You're lying, she said. Nobody can remove it. We've tried everything. Let me try anyway. Lyra took a slow step forward. If I fail, you're no worse off than you are now. A man emerged from one of the larger shelters. He was older, maybe 50, with scars that suggested he'd been a fighter once. His eyes were bloodshot and his hands trembled, but his voice came out steady. Who are you? Someone who knows what it's like to be thrown away, Lyra said. Someone who's tired of watching people suffer because the ones in power are too afraid to do what's necessary. The man studied her with an intensity that felt like being flayed. Then he nodded once and gestured toward a smaller shelter set apart from the others. We've got 3 who are too far gone, he said. If you can do anything for them, I'll believe you. If not, you leave and don't come back. Fair enough. Lyra followed him to the isolated shelter and immediately understood why they'd separated it. The corruption smell was overwhelming here, thick enough to taste. Inside, 3 wolves lay on bedrolls, their bodies convulsing with fever and their eyes rolled back in their heads. Black veins spread under their skin like cracks in ice. How long? Lyra asked. The man's voice was rough. 2 days for the boy. 4 for the others. We've been keeping them sedated so they don't hurt themselves or anyone else. Lyra knelt beside the youngest, a kid who couldn't be more than 15. His face was twisted with pain even in unconsciousness, and when she put her hand on his chest, she felt the curse immediately. It was like touching poison, something dark and alive that burrowed into flesh and corrupted everything it found. She closed her eyes and reached for the power Senna had taught her to wield. Silver light bloomed from her palm and sank into the boy's chest. She followed it down, chasing the tendrils of darkness that had wrapped around his heart and lungs. The curse fought back, trying to spread faster than she could burn it away. Lyra gritted her teeth and pulled harder on the divine energy, flooding the boy's body with it. The darkness retreated. Slowly, inch by painful inch, she forced the corruption out of his system and dissolved it in silver fire. When she finally opened her eyes, the boy's breathing had steadied and the black veins were fading. He'd live. She moved to the next one. By the time she finished with all 3, Lyra was soaked with sweat and shaking from exhaustion. But the corrupted wolves were breathing normally, their skin clear, their expressions peaceful for the first time in days. She stumbled out of the shelter and found the entire camp watching her. The man who'd let her in stared at her like she'd just walked on water. What are you? Tired, Lyra said, and probably making a mistake. But when the woman with the spear dropped it and fell to her knees, when the others started whispering prayers to the moon goddess, when children crept closer with hope dawning on their faces, Lyra thought maybe this particular mistake was worth making. Even if the kingdom didn't deserve her mercy, these wolves did. She spent the next 3 days moving through the camp, healing everyone who showed signs of infection and teaching them basic wards that might slow the curse's spread. Word traveled fast. By the end of the week, more refugees had arrived, and then more, until Lyra found herself at the center of a growing community of wolves who looked at her like salvation made flesh. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. And 400 miles south, in the royal capital, the shadow curse finally breached the outer wards and began its slow, inexorable crawl toward the throne. Rowan knew something was wrong the moment he woke. The bond mark on his wrist was burning. Not the dull ache he'd carried since Lyra left. This was sharp, immediate, demanding attention. He sat up in the darkness of his chambers and pressed his hand to it, trying to make sense of what he was feeling. Lyra was alive. That much was clear. But there was something else now, something new flowing through the bond. Power. Raw and vast and utterly unlike anything he'd ever felt from her before. What have you become? He whispered to the empty room. The bond gave him no answer. He rose and dressed, moving quietly so he wouldn't wake Mira in the adjoining chamber, his political wife, the alliance he'd chosen over love. She was perfectly pleasant, adequately competent, and completely wrong. Every day with her was a reminder of what he'd sacrificed. Rowan made his way through the darkened palace to his private study and poured himself a drink he didn't want. The past month had been hell. Guilt ate at him constantly, made worse by the fact that he couldn't even explain to anyone why he felt like he was drowning. To the council, to his mother, to the entire kingdom, he'd made the right choice. The only choice. So why did it feel like he'd carved out his own heart and left it bleeding in that throne room? A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Enter. Marcus stepped inside, still in his guard uniform, but with an expression that suggested this wasn't an official visit. Your Majesty, we need to talk. Rowan gestured for him to continue. The outer territories are reporting something we don't have a name for, Marcus said. Entire packs going dark. Villages emptied. The few survivors who've made it to the capital are telling stories about wolves losing their minds and tearing each other apart. Rowan's blood went cold. How many packs? At least 6. Maybe more. Communications are breaking down. Marcus moved closer, lowering his voice. And there's something else. The survivors are talking about a woman. They say she's gathering refugees in the northern forest, healing the ones who've been infected, protecting the ones who haven't. They say she glows like the moon itself. Rowan's hand went to his bond mark. Lyra. Marcus nodded. I thought you should know before your mother hears about it, because when she does, she'll send hunters, Rowan finished. She'll see Lyra as a threat, not a solution. Is she wrong? The question hit Rowan like a physical blow. He wanted to say yes, to insist that Lyra would never become something dangerous, but the power he felt through the bond, the way it pulsed with barely contained force, he didn't know what she was anymore. Maybe that was his fault. I need to see her, Rowan said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The northern forest? Your Majesty, I don't care how forbidden it is. If there's a chance she can stop whatever's happening to the packs, I need to know. And if she can't, he stopped. If she can't, then we're all dead anyway. Marcus studied him for a long moment. This isn't about the curse, is it? This is about guilt. Both, Rowan admitted. I made a choice, Marcus. I'm not sure I can live with it. Then you'd better hope she's willing to forgive you, Marcus said. Because from what I hear, the girl you exiled isn't the woman who came back. Son, news of Rowan's planned journey north reached Alora before he'd finished preparing. She appeared in his chambers like a storm given human form, her expression carved from ice and fury. Tell me you're not actually stupid enough to chase after that girl. Rowan didn't look up from the map he was studying. She's not a girl. She's the only person who seems capable of stopping the corruption spreading through our kingdom. She's a threat, Alara snapped. Everything happening right now proves I was right to remove her. The moment she gained access to real power, she started gathering wolves to her banner. Do you not see what she's building? A refuge for people we failed to protect. An army. Alara moved closer. She's gathering the desperate and the displaced, positioning herself as their savior. And when she's collected enough followers, she'll march on the capital and take everything you threw her away to keep. Rowan finally looked at his mother. You don't know that. I know power, Alara said. I know how it works and what it wants. That girl isn't healing refugees out of kindness. She's building loyalty. She's creating a base of support that doesn't answer to you or the council or anyone but her. And when she's ready, she'll use them. Or maybe she's just trying to survive, Rowan said quietly. Maybe we drove her to this by treating her like a problem instead of a person. Alara's expression hardened. If you go to her, you'll be walking into a trap. She'll use your guilt against you, manipulate that bond you're too weak to sever, and turn you into her puppet. Is that what you want? To be controlled by some common wolf with delusions of divinity? Rowan stood. His voice came out harder than he intended. She was never common. You knew it. That's why you were so desperate to get rid of her. His mother went very still. Excuse me? The blessing, Rowan continued. The old bloodline. All those stories about the moon's chosen that the council claims are myths. They're real, aren't they? And you saw signs of it in Lyra. That's what this was really about. Alara's silence was confirmation enough. You sacrificed her to protect your version of power, Rowan said. You were so afraid of what she might become that you destroyed her before she could figure it out. And now that same power you feared is the only thing that might save us. The curse is a test, Alara said coldly. The strong will survive it. The weak won't. That's how nature works. That's how you work, Rowan corrected. But I'm done letting your fear make my decisions. He walked past her toward the door. If you leave this palace to find her, Alara called after him, don't bother coming back. I'll have the council name you unfit and put someone else on the throne. Then do it, Rowan said without turning around. The crown's not worth what I paid for it anyway. He left her standing in his chambers and felt the bond mark on his wrist burn with an intensity that was almost approval. Lyra was waiting in the north. And one way or another, Rowan was going to face what he'd broken. Rowan left the capital at dawn with only Marcus and 2 trusted guards. They rode hard toward the northern border, pushing the horses faster than was safe, because every hour they delayed meant more packs falling to the corruption. The bond mark on Rowan's wrist pulsed steadily, a compass pointing toward Lyra with an accuracy that unsettled him. She was close now, close enough that he could feel her presence like heat against his skin, close enough that she probably knew he was coming. Marcus rode beside him, his expression grim. "You know this could be an ambush." "I know, and you're going anyway." Rowan didn't answer. What was there to say? That guilt was eating him alive? That every night since the exile he woke up gasping from dreams where Lyra stood in that throne room and he actually found the courage to choose her? That the bond between them was the only thing keeping him from putting a blade through his own throat just to make the self-hatred stop? None of that would help. They crossed into the Forbidden Forest 2 days later and immediately felt the change. The air grew thick, charged with power that made Rowan's wolf instinct scream warnings. Trees loomed overhead like sentinels. Shadows moved in ways that didn't match the wind. This place wanted them gone. "Your Majesty," one of the guards said nervously, "we should turn back." "We keep going," Rowan said. They pushed deeper. By nightfall, they'd found the refugee camp. It sprawled across a valley that shouldn't exist this far north, dozens of shelters housing maybe 200 wolves. Cook fires burned, children played, guards patrolled the perimeter with weapons and expressions that suggested they knew how to use them. This wasn't a camp, it was a settlement, the beginning of something bigger. Rowan dismounted and walked toward the entrance. Guards moved to intercept him immediately, their hands on their blades. "State your business," one of them demanded. "I need to see Lyra Vale." The guards exchanged glances. One of them disappeared into the camp, while the others kept Rowan and his men surrounded. They waited in tense silence until the guard returned with a woman Rowan didn't recognize. Older, maybe 40, with scars across her face and eyes that had seen too much. "The Moon Queen doesn't see visitors without appointment," she said. Moon Queen. The title hit Rowan like a fist. That's what they were calling her now. Not Luna, not Exile. Queen. "Tell her Rowan Draven is here," he said. "Tell her I need to talk." The woman's expression hardened. "We know who you are. The question is why you think she'd waste breath on the man who threw her to the wolves." "Because I made a mistake," Rowan said quietly, "and I'm here to fix it." The woman studied him with open contempt. "You don't fix what you did. You live with it." She turned to leave. "Please," Rowan called after her. "Just ask her. If she says no, I'll go." The woman stopped but didn't turn around. "You'll wait here. If you or your men make one wrong move, my guards will put you down." Then she was gone, swallowed by the camp. Rowan stood at the entrance with Marcus beside him and the bond mark burning against his wrist. Every instinct told him this was a bad idea, that walking into Lyra's territory after what he'd done was suicidal. But the alternative was watching his kingdom die from a curse he didn't understand, while the only person who might save it refused to acknowledge his existence. He'd take suicidal over helpless. 20 minutes later, the woman returned. Her expression suggested she was disappointed she hadn't gotten to refuse him. "Follow me," she said, "and keep your hands where we can see them." They led Rowan through the camp alone. Marcus and the guards stayed behind under heavy watch. Wolves stopped what they were doing to stare as he passed, their eyes full of recognition and barely concealed hostility. Some of them spat on the ground. Others just watched with the cold assessment of people deciding if he was worth the effort of killing. Rowan kept his spine straight and his eyes forward. The woman brought him to a clearing at the camp center where a large tent had been erected. It was simple, functional, nothing like the elaborate pavilions the nobility used, but power radiated from it like heat from a forge. "She's inside," the woman said. "Remember what I said about wrong moves?" Rowan pushed aside the tent flap and stepped through. The interior was lit by silver light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Lyra stood in the center with her back to him, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and her posture radiating a confidence he'd never seen before. She wore simple clothes, leather pants, a sleeveless shirt, but somehow looked more regal than anyone he'd ever seen in the royal palace. When she turned to face him, Rowan's breath caught. She was luminous, not metaphorically. Her skin actually glowed with faint silver light, and her eyes had taken on a quality that was more divine than wolf. The bond mark on her wrist blazed bright enough to see from across the tent. This wasn't the woman he'd exiled. This was something else entirely. "Hello, Rowan," Lyra said. Her voice was steady, controlled, completely devoid of warmth. "Long way from your throne. I came to apologize. Little late for that." "I know." Rowan took a step forward and stopped when her expression warned him not to come closer. "But I need to say it anyway. What I did to you, what I let them do to you, was unforgivable. I chose politics over everything that mattered, and I've regretted it every second since." Lyra's expression didn't change. "So you rode all the way here to ease your guilt? How noble." "No." Rowan forced himself to hold her gaze. "I came because the kingdom is dying, and you're the only one who seems capable of stopping it. I came because my mother was right to fear you. You're more powerful than any of us understood. And I came because I owe you the truth. I was a coward. I let fear and duty corrupt the one real thing I had in my life, and now I'm watching it all fall apart." Lyra moved closer. The silver light intensified. "You think honesty buys you anything? You think admitting you're a coward somehow makes it better?" "No," Rowan said quietly. "Nothing makes it better. I destroyed us. I know that." "You destroyed me." Lyra's voice cracked for the first time. "You stood in front of the entire kingdom and let them call me unworthy. You sat on that throne beside your political princess and didn't say a single word while they stripped everything from me. And then you sent hunters to make sure I understood my place. I didn't send hunters. Your mother did." "Same difference." Lyra's hands clenched at her sides. "You're the king, Rowan. Everything she does carries your authority, whether you give it explicitly or not." Rowan felt the accusation land like a blade between his ribs. She was right. He told himself he didn't know about the hunters, that he couldn't control everything Alara did, but the truth was he'd chosen not to know. Chosen to let his mother handle the ugly details while he sat in his throne room and drowned in guilt. He'd been complicit through cowardice. "I'm sorry," he said. The words felt pathetically inadequate. Lyra laughed. It was a harsh, broken sound. "You're sorry. The man who chose a crown over my beating heart is sorry. What do you want me to do with that, Rowan? Forgive you? Welcome you back? Pretend the past month didn't happen? I want you to help save the kingdom." "Why?" Lyra's eyes blazed. "Why would I save people who threw me away? Why would I risk myself for wolves who watched my humiliation and did nothing? Give me one good reason." "Because they're dying," Rowan said. "Because whatever's happening out there doesn't care about politics or who was right or who was wrong. It's killing indiscriminately, and if you don't stop it, thousands of innocent wolves will die for crimes they didn't commit." "Like I almost did?" The question hung in the air between them. "Yes," Rowan admitted, "like you almost did. I failed you, Lyra. I failed you in every way that matters. But don't fail them because of my mistakes." Lyra turned away from him. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I've been healing the refugees, teaching them wards, protecting them from the corruption. Do you know why? Because you're better than the people who hurt you. Because I refuse to let your mother's fear turn me into a monster." Lyra looked back at him. She wanted me gone because she was terrified I'd become something she couldn't control. Fine. I became it. But I'm not the villain in her story. I'm just someone who survived. "Then help me end this," Rowan said. "Come back to the capital. Work with me to stop the curse." Lyra's expression hardened. "I'm not going back to that throne room. Not now. Not ever." "Then I'll bring the resources here. Whatever you need." "I don't need your resources," Lyra interrupted. "I need you to leave." "Lyra, go back to your capital, Rowan. Go back to your political wife and your council and your mother, who's probably planning how to kill me the moment I'm useful enough to justify the risk. I'll handle the curse my way." "Alone? I've got 200 wolves here who trust me," Lyra said. "That's more than I had in your palace." The dismissal in her voice cut deeper than any blade. Rowan opened his mouth to argue, to beg, to offer something that might bridge the distance between them. But before he could speak, chaos erupted outside. Screaming, the clash of weapons, wolves shouting warnings. Lyra's expression shifted immediately from cold anger to sharp focus. She moved past Rowan and out of the tent with speed that left him scrambling to follow. The camp was under attack, but not from the outside. From within, wolves. Rowan recognized as refugees were tearing into each other with mindless savagery, their eyes rolled back and black veins spreading across their skin. The corruption. It had breached the camp's defenses and was spreading through the population like wildfire. Lyra stood in the center of the chaos and raised her hands. Silver light exploded from her palms. washing over the corrupted wolves in waves. Some of them collapsed immediately, the darkness burning out of their systems. Others kept fighting, too far gone to save. Rowan drew his blade and moved to help. A corrupted wolf lunged at him, and he cut it down with brutal efficiency, hating every second of it. These were supposed to be his people, his responsibility. And he was killing them. Lyra was everywhere at once, moving with inhuman speed and precision. She pulled wolves back from the edge of corruption, shielded the healthy ones from attack, and put down the ones too far gone with swift, merciful strikes. Her face was set in lines of grim determination. She was saving them, all of them. Even the ones who'd probably cheered when she was exiled. The battle lasted maybe 10 minutes, but felt like hours. When it finally ended, the camp was a mess of blood and bodies and terrified wolves huddling together. Lyra stood in the center, breathing hard, her skin glowing so brightly she looked like a star made flesh. "How many?" she asked the scarred woman who'd brought Rowan in. 12 dead, 20 infected. The woman's voice was steady despite the carnage. "We got to most of them in time." Lyra nodded. "Quarantine the infected. I'll heal them when I've recovered enough power." She turned to Rowan. Her expression was unreadable. "This is what you wanted to bring me back to? This is the kingdom you're trying to save?" Rowan looked at the devastation around them. "It's worse in the capital. The wards are failing. Without your help." "Without my help, they'll die," Lyra finished. "I know. I can feel it through the bond. Your precious kingdom is rotting from the inside out, and you need the woman you exiled to fix it." "Yes." Lyra moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the silver fire burning in her eyes. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm not going back to the capital. If you want my help, you bring the infected to me. I'll heal them here, on my terms, without your mother's politics or the council's judgment." "That's not sustainable," Rowan said. "There are thousands." "Then thousands will come here," Lyra interrupted. "This is my offer. Take it or watch your kingdom burn." Before Rowan could respond, Marcus appeared at the edge of the camp with one of the guards. His expression was grave. "Your Majesty, we need to leave. Now." "What's wrong?" Marcus glanced at Lyra, then back at Rowan. "Your mother sent a battalion after you. They're maybe an hour behind us, and they're not coming to negotiate." Rowan's blood went cold. "How many?" 200 soldiers, full combat gear." Marcus's jaw was tight. "She's not trying to bring you home, Your Majesty. She's trying to eliminate the threat before it can challenge her authority." He was talking about Lyra. Alara wasn't just sending hunters anymore, she was sending an army. Rowan turned to Lyra and saw the understanding dawn on her face. She knew what was coming, knew that his mother had finally decided the risk was too great to manage, that the only way to handle a blessed wolf with growing power and a loyal following was to erase her completely. "You need to run," Rowan said. "Take your people and go deeper into the forest where they can't find you." Lyra's expression went cold as winter. "I'm done running. You can't fight 200 trained soldiers. Watch me." The silver light around her intensified. Power crackled in the air like lightning looking for a target, and Rowan realized with growing horror that she meant it. Lyra was going to stand her ground and fight, even if it meant dying in the process, because she'd rather die than be driven away again. "Please," Rowan said, his voice cracked. "Please don't do this." Lyra looked at him with something that might have been pity. "You made your choice a month ago, Rowan. Now I'm making mine." She turned to the scarred woman. "Gather everyone who can fight. We've got an hour to prepare defenses." The woman nodded and started shouting orders. The camp erupted into controlled chaos as wolves grabbed weapons and began fortifying positions. Rowan stood frozen, watching the woman he'd destroyed prepare for a battle that would almost certainly kill her. Marcus touched his arm. "We need to go. If we're here when that battalion arrives, they'll assume we're enemy combatants. I can't leave her." "You already did," Marcus said quietly. "Month ago, remember?" The words hit like a physical blow because they were true. Rowan had made his choice in that throne room when he'd chosen duty over love, politics over truth. Everything happening now was just the consequence playing out. He'd set this in motion the moment he'd stayed silent. "Your Majesty," Marcus said again, "we're out of time." Rowan looked at Lyra one more time. She was organizing defenses with the efficiency of someone who'd been preparing for war her entire life. The refugees moved around her with absolute trust, following her orders without question. She didn't need him. Maybe she never had. He turned and followed Marcus back toward the horses. They were halfway there when the first screams started. But these screams weren't coming from the camp. They were coming from the forest behind them, from the direction of the approaching battalion. Rowan spun around and saw it. The shadow curse had found Alara's soldiers. Through the trees, barely visible in the fading light, he could see wolves tearing into each other with mindless fury. The corruption was spreading through the battalion like poison through water, turning trained soldiers into rabid animals in seconds. And it was moving toward the refugee camp. Lyra saw it too. Her face went pale. "Get everyone into the center of the camp," she shouted. "Now!" The refugees scrambled to obey. Lyra stood at the perimeter with her hands raised, silver light building around her like a storm about to break. She was going to try to shield them all. It would kill her. Rowan could feel it through the bond. The sheer amount of power required to protect 200 wolves from a corruption this strong would burn through her completely. She was going to sacrifice herself to save people who'd abandoned her. Because that's who she was. Something broke inside Rowan's chest. Every excuse he'd made, every justification he'd hidden behind, every cowardly choice. It all crumbled in the face of watching Lyra prepare to die for wolves who didn't deserve her mercy. He'd told himself he'd chosen duty over love for the good of the kingdom. But the truth was, he'd just been afraid. Afraid of his mother. Afraid of the council. Afraid of being the kind of king who chose his heart over politics. And that fear had brought them here. To this moment. Where the woman he loved was about to burn herself to ash protecting people from a threat his own mother had created by sending soldiers into cursed territory. Rowan made a decision. He ran toward Lyra. Marcus shouted after him, but he didn't stop. He crossed the camp at a dead sprint and reached her just as the first wave of corrupted soldiers broke through the tree line. "What are you doing?" Lyra demanded. Rowan grabbed her hand, the one with the bond mark, and felt power slam into him like a tidal wave. The connection between them, damaged and fraying, suddenly blazed to life with an intensity that made his vision white out. "I'm choosing you," he said. "Whatever happens, I'm choosing you." Lyra's eyes went wide. "Rowan!" The corrupted soldiers hit the camp's perimeter, and Lyra pulled on the bond with everything she had, using Rowan as a channel to amplify her own power. Silver light exploded from both of them, creating a barrier that stopped the corrupted wolves in their tracks. They slammed against it and fell back, shrieking with mindless rage. But there were too many. The barrier held for maybe 10 seconds before cracks started forming. Lyra's grip on his hand tightened. "I can't hold them." "Yes, you can," Rowan said through gritted teeth. The power burning through him was excruciating, like being torn apart from the inside. "We can." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since he'd arrived. And in her eyes he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with, the one he'd betrayed, the one who was choosing to save everyone even though she had every reason to let them burn. "Together," she said. "Together," Rowan agreed. They pulled harder on the bond, drawing power not just from the divine blessing in Lyra's blood, but from the connection itself, the sacred tie the moon goddess had forged between true mates. Silver light poured from them in waves, washing over the corrupted soldiers and burning the darkness out of their systems. One by one, the soldiers collapsed and went still. The corruption fled before the combined force of blessed power and bonded souls working in harmony. When the last corrupted wolf fell, Lyra and Rowan stood in the center of a circle of silver light, with 200 refugees staring at them in awe and 90 soldiers lying unconscious on the ground. They'd done it. They'd stopped the curse. Lyra released his hand and staggered backward. Rowan caught her before she fell, pulling her against his chest. She was shaking, her skin fever-hot from channeling that much power. "I've got you," he whispered. For a moment, she let him hold her. Just for a moment. Then she pulled away. "This doesn't change anything," she said. Her voice was exhausted but firm. "You still made your choice. We still broke." "I know. I can't trust you, Rowan. Not after what you did." "I know," he said again. Lyra looked at him with eyes that held too much pain to name. "Then why are you still here?" "Because I'd rather spend the rest of my life earning back your trust than spend another day pretending the crown was worth losing you." The words hung in the air between them. Before Lyra could respond, the scarred woman appeared beside them. "Moon Queen, we've got a problem." Lyra straightened, pulling herself together with visible effort. "What now?" "The soldiers are waking up, and they're asking for the king." Rowan turned to see the battalion members stirring, their expressions confused and disoriented. They'd been sent here to eliminate a threat. Now they were waking up in the middle of that threat's camp, cured of a corruption that should have killed them. This was the moment. The choice that would define everything that came next. Rowan could order them to stand down, could try to broker some kind of peace between Lyra's refugees and the capital, or he could do what his mother expected and finish the mission they'd been sent for. He looked at Lyra, at the wolves she'd saved, at the power still crackling faintly around her like silver fire, and he made his choice. He walked toward the waking soldiers and raised his voice to carry across the camp. "I am Alpha King Rowan Draven," he called, "and I'm ordering you to stand down. These refugees are under my protection. Anyone who raises a weapon against them answers to me." The soldiers stared at him in confusion. One of the officers, a man Rowan recognized from the Royal Guard, struggled to his feet. "Your Majesty, we were ordered by the Queen Regent to eliminate the hostile force gathering in the north." "The Queen Regent was wrong," Rowan said. "The only hostile force here is the corruption, and these wolves just saved your lives from it." He turned to face the entire assembled group, soldiers and refugees alike. "The shadow curse is real. It's spreading, and the only person who seems capable of stopping it is the woman my mother ordered you to kill. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to return to the capital and tell the council that I've allied with Lyra Vale. Tell them the exile was a mistake. Tell them she's the solution, not the problem." The officer's expression went pale. "Your Majesty, if we return with that message, the Queen Regent will have us executed for treason." "Then don't go back," Rowan said simply. "Stay here. Join the refugees. Help protect the people who actually need it instead of serving a woman who sends soldiers into cursed territory just to eliminate political threats." The camp went silent. Every eye was on Rowan, waiting to see what would happen next. The officer looked at Lyra. "You're really the Moon Queen they're talking about?" Lyra met his gaze steadily. "I'm someone who's tired of watching wolves die for the mistakes of people in power. If you want to call that a queen, that's your choice." The officer looked at his men, looked at the refugees who'd sheltered them, looked at Rowan standing beside Lyra like he was prepared to fight his own mother's army if necessary. Then he dropped to one knee. "The Moon Queen has my loyalty," he said. One by one, the other soldiers followed suit. 90 wolves kneeling in the dirt, swearing allegiance to the woman the kingdom had tried to destroy. Rowan felt something shift in his chest. This was it. The point of no return. He'd just chosen Lyra over his crown, over his mother, over everything he'd been raised to protect. And it felt like the first honest thing he'd done in months. He looked at Lyra and saw tears streaming down her face. Not from sadness, from the weight of what she'd just become, what they'd forced her to become. She wasn't just a refugee anymore. She was a leader, a queen in truth, and she was terrified. Rowan wanted to tell her it would be okay, that they'd figure this out together. But before he could speak, Marcus appeared at his side with an expression that suggested the worst wasn't over. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "we've got incoming." "From where?" "The capital." Marcus pointed toward the southern sky, where dark shapes were moving against the stars. "Your mother's not sending foot soldiers anymore. She's sending her aerial guard." Rowan's blood turned to ice. The aerial guard was Alara's personal force, elite warriors mounted on the largest, most vicious wolves the kingdom had ever bred. They didn't take prisoners. They didn't negotiate. They burned problems to ash and called it justice. "How many?" Lyra asked. Her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. 50, Marcus said. "Maybe more. They'll be here in minutes." The camp erupted into chaos. Refugees grabbed children and ran for the forest. Soldiers who'd just sworn loyalty to Lyra scrambled for weapons. Everyone knew what was coming. A massacre. Lyra turned to Rowan. Her face was set in lines of grim determination. "Get your people out of here," she said. "They're your people now, too. Then get them to safety." She started walking toward the camp's edge where the aerial guard would arrive first. "I'll buy you time." Rowan grabbed her arm. "You can't fight 50 elite warriors alone. Watch me." The silver light around her intensified until she blazed like a second moon, and Rowan realized with absolute certainty that she was going to stand here and burn through every ounce of power she had to protect wolves who'd spent years treating her like she didn't matter. She was going to die a queen, unless he stopped her. Rowan made the hardest choice of his life. He turned to Marcus. "Get everyone deeper into the forest. Use the bond as a beacon. I'll find you when this is over." "Your Majesty." "Go!" Marcus hesitated for one more second, then started shouting orders. The refugees and soldiers moved as one, disappearing into the trees with desperate speed. Rowan turned back to Lyra. She was watching him with an expression that held too many emotions to name. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Staying," Rowan said simply. "You don't get to die alone, not after everything." The aerial guard crested the tree line. 50 massive wolves with riders in black armor descended on the camp like a plague made flesh. They carried torches and weapons that gleamed in the firelight. At their head was a woman Rowan recognized, Commander Vale, his mother's most loyal enforcer. She landed her mount 20 feet from where Rowan and Lyra stood and removed her helmet. Her expression was carved from stone. "By order of Queen Regent Elara Draven," she called, "the hostile force known as Lyra Vale is to be eliminated immediately. All collaborators will be executed for treason." Rowan stepped in front of Lyra. His voice carried across the clearing. "I am your king," he said, "and I'm ordering you to stand down." Commander Vale's expression didn't change. "You lost the right to give orders when you chose a traitor over the crown, Your Majesty. The council has voted. You've been declared unfit to rule." The words hit Rowan like a physical blow. His mother had done it. She'd actually removed him from power. He was no longer king. Commander Vale drew her blade. "Last chance to surrender, both of you." Lyra's hand found Rowan's. Silver light blazed between them, the bond mark on both their wrists burning bright enough to illuminate the entire clearing. "Together?" she asked quietly. "Together," Rowan agreed. The aerial guard attacked. And in the moment before the blades fell, Rowan understood what it meant to choose love over power, truth over politics. The woman beside him over the crown he'd never truly wanted. He'd spent his whole life being what everyone else needed him to be. Now, standing here about to die beside the woman he'd destroyed and rebuilt and chosen all over again, he was finally just himself. It was worth it. The battle began. The first blade came for Rowan's throat. He twisted sideways and felt steel kiss the air where his neck had been a heartbeat before. Silver light exploded from Lyra's free hand and slammed into the attacker, sending the aerial guard spinning backward off her mount. The massive wolf she'd been riding crashed into two others, and the clearing erupted into chaos. Commander Vale was already moving, her blade arcing toward Lyra with the precision of someone who'd killed 100 times before. Rowan threw himself between them and caught the strike on his forearm. Pain bloomed white-hot as steel bit through leather and found flesh. Blood ran hot down his wrist, but he held his ground. "You chose wrong," Vale hissed. "No," Rowan said through gritted teeth. "I finally chose right." He shoved her back and pulled his own blade with his good hand. Around them, the aerial guard was descending in waves. Lyra stood at his back with silver fire pouring from her palms, creating a barrier that stopped most of the attacks but wouldn't hold forever. Rowan could feel the strain through their bond. She was burning through power faster than she could replenish it. They had minutes, maybe less. A guard lunged from the left, and Rowan cut him down with brutal efficiency. Another came from the right and met Lyra's light, collapsing with black veins receding from his skin as she burned the corruption out of him mid-attack. They were fighting on instinct now, their bodies moving in sync like they'd trained together for years instead of being separated by Echelon betrayal. The bond between them sang with shared purpose. But there were too many. For every guard they dropped, two more took their place. Rowan's injured arm was going numb. Lyra's barrier was flickering. They were being pushed back toward the center of the camp with nowhere left to run. This is how it ends, Rowan thought. Not on a throne, not in glory. Just two people who finally figured out what mattered right before the world took it away. He glanced at Lyra and found her already looking at him. Her face was streaked with sweat and dirt, and there was blood on her temple from a strike that had gotten through, but her eyes were clear, determined, beautiful. "If we're doing this," she said quietly, "we do it all the way." "What do you mean?" She grabbed his injured arm, the one bleeding freely, and pressed her palm against the wound. Power slammed through him with an intensity that made his vision white out. The bond mark on both their wrists blazed like stars, and Rowan felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. Lyra was pulling power through the bond, but this time she wasn't just amplifying her own abilities. She was changing him, awakening something in his blood that had been dormant his entire life. The aerial guards hesitated. Even Commander Vale took a step backward, because Rowan was glowing now too. Silver light poured from his skin in waves that matched Lyra's, and when he looked down at his hands, he saw symbols crawling across his flesh. Old language, divine markings, the physical manifestation of a blessing he'd never known he carried. "How?" he managed. "You're my true mate," Lyra said. "The bond doesn't just connect us. It shares everything, including this. She'd just made him blessed. The realization hit Rowan like lightning. His mother had spent years trying to keep blessed blood away from the throne, convinced it would undermine royal authority. But the moment she'd allowed him to bond with Lyra, she'd guaranteed the very thing she feared. The blessing didn't care about politics. It flowed where the moon goddess directed it, and she'd directed it straight into the heart of the royal line. Commander Vale's expression went from confident to calculating. She raised her hand and the aerial guard pulled back, forming a perimeter but not attacking. "Clever," she called across the clearing, "but it changes nothing. You're still outnumbered, still surrounded, and the moment that power burns out, you're dead." "Then I guess we'd better make it count," Lyra said. She looked at Rowan. Her hand was still pressed against his bleeding arm, and through the bond he could feel what she was about to do. It was insane, reckless, possibly suicidal. It was also the only chance they had. "Trust me?" she asked. "Always," Rowan said. It was the truth. He'd broken her trust once and spent every moment since drowning in the consequences. If she was asking him to follow her into madness now, he'd do it without hesitation, because some things were worth dying for. Lyra pulled harder on the bond than she ever had before. Power flooded through both of them in a torrent that felt like being torn apart and rebuilt simultaneously. The silver light intensified until the entire clearing blazed bright as noon. Rowan's veins felt like they were full of liquid fire, and his heart was hammering so hard he thought his ribs might crack. Then Lyra released the power in a single, devastating pulse. The shockwave exploded outward in all directions, slamming into the aerial guards with the force of a tidal wave. Wolves and riders went flying. The massive mounts collapsed to their knees. Even Commander Vale was thrown backward, her armor cracking from the impact. When the light finally faded, Rowan and Lyra stood alone in a circle of unconscious guards. They'd won. Rowan's legs gave out and he collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. Every muscle in his body felt like it had been shredded. His vision was blurry and his ears were ringing and the taste of copper filled his mouth. But they were alive. Lyra dropped beside him, her hand still gripping his. She was in worse shape than he was. Her skin had gone pale and her breathing was shallow, and the glow around her had faded to barely a flicker. She'd nearly killed herself to save them both. "That was stupid," Rowan managed through the pain. Lyra laughed weakly. "Yeah, well, you make me do stupid things." He wanted to respond, to tell her that stupid was abandoning her in the first place, but before he could form words, the ground beneath them began to shake. Not earthquake tremors. Something worse. The Shadow Curse was responding to the massive release of divine power like a shark sensing blood in the water. Rowan could feel it approaching, a wave of corruption drawn by the beacon they'd just lit. It was moving fast, consuming everything in its path, and it was headed straight for them. "We need to move," Rowan said. Lyra tried to stand and collapsed back down. Her power was spent. She'd burned through everything she had, and then some. Rowan forced himself upright on shaking legs and pulled her against his chest. Around them, the aerial guards were starting to stir. In minutes they'd be surrounded again, and this time neither he nor Lyra had the strength left to fight. They were out of options. Then Marcus appeared at the edge of the clearing with 50 wolves at his back, the soldiers who'd sworn loyalty to Lyra, plus refugees armed with whatever weapons they could find. His face was grim, but determined. "We heard the explosion," he said. "Figured you could use backup." Rowan had never been so grateful to see anyone in his life. "The curse is coming," he said. "We need to get everyone out of here now." Marcus nodded and started shouting orders. Wolves moved with military precision, grabbing the unconscious guards and hauling them toward the forest. Rowan carried Lyra, following Marcus deeper into the trees as the ground behind them began to crack and split. The Shadow Curse burst through the tree line like a living thing. It wasn't just corruption anymore. It had mass, substance, form. A writhing darkness that consumed everything it touched and grew stronger with each wolf it infected. Rowan could see faces in the shadows, wolves who'd fallen to the curse, their consciousness trapped inside the thing that had destroyed them. It was feeding on suffering. "Keep moving," Marcus shouted. They ran. The forest became a nightmare of twisted paths and grasping branches. Behind them, the curse spread like ink through water, devouring trees and earth and anything unlucky enough to be caught in its path. Rowan's arms burned from carrying Lyra, but he didn't slow down. He could feel her heart beating against his chest, weak but steady. She was still alive. That was enough. They broke through into a ravine Marcus must have scouted earlier. a narrow gap between two cliff faces that funneled into a cave system. The refugees and soldiers poured inside while Marcus and a handful of fighters stayed at the entrance to hold off any pursuers. Rowan laid Lyra down on the cave floor as gently as he could. Her eyes fluttered open and found his. "How bad?" she whispered. "We're alive," Rowan said. "That's what matters. The curse is right outside." He smoothed hair back from her forehead. "But we're safe for now." A woman appeared beside them, one of the refugees who'd been helping coordinate the evacuation. She had medical supplies and started working on Lyra's injuries with efficient hands. Rowan stepped back to give her room and immediately regretted it when his wounded arm reminded him it existed. The cut Vale had given him was deep, still bleeding freely. He pressed his good hand against it and tried not to think about how much blood he'd already lost. Marcus ducked into the cave with his fighters right behind him. The last one through triggered a rockfall that sealed the entrance, plunging them into darkness broken only by a few hastily lit torches. "We're trapped," one of the soldiers said nervously. "We're protected," Marcus corrected. "That curse can't get through solid rock. For how long?" "As long as it takes." Rowan moved to where Marcus stood near the sealed entrance. Through gaps in the rockfall, he could see the darkness outside, writhing and searching for a way in. "What's our status?" he asked quietly. 230 souls, Marcus reported. About half are fighters. The rest are children, elderly, or injured. We've got maybe 3 days of supplies if we ration carefully. And then, Marcus met his gaze. Then we hope the curse moves on, or we figure out how to kill it. Rowan looked back at Lyra. The healer was wrapping bandages around her ribs, and the silver glow around her had faded completely. She'd used everything she had, and it still wasn't enough. They were stuck in a cave with limited supplies, surrounded by a curse that was consuming the kingdom, and the woman who represented their only hope of survival was barely conscious. The situation was impossible, which meant they needed a miracle, or they needed to create one. Rowan made his way back to Lyra and knelt beside her. Her eyes were closed, but her breathing had steadied. The healer nodded at him with cautious optimism. "She'll recover, just needs rest." "How long?" "Days. Maybe a week if we're lucky." "We don't have a week," Rowan said. "Then you'd better pray for a miracle," the healer said flatly. She moved off to tend to other wounded, and Rowan was left alone with Lyra. He took her hand carefully, mindful of the bandages, and felt the bond pulse weakly between them. Through that connection, he could sense her dreams. She was fighting even in unconsciousness, battling shadows that had no form and no mercy. She'd been fighting since the moment they exiled her, and she hadn't stopped. She was so damn strong, stronger than anyone Rowan had ever known, and he'd almost destroyed her. The weight of that knowledge sat in his chest like a stone. He'd made choices based on fear and duty and political calculation, and every single one of them had been wrong. Wrong for the kingdom, wrong for Lyra, wrong for himself. He'd been so convinced that being king meant sacrifice, that leadership required setting aside personal desires for the greater good. But sitting here in a cave with a curse devouring the world outside, Rowan understood the truth. Real leadership wasn't about sacrifice. It was about knowing what actually mattered, and what mattered was right here in front of him. This woman who'd been thrown away and came back blazing. These refugees who'd chosen to follow her because she actually gave a damn about their survival. These soldiers who'd sworn loyalty, not because of politics, but because they'd seen something worth protecting. This was the kingdom worth saving. Not the one his mother ruled with fear and manipulation. Not the council chambers full of nobles trading lives like currency. This. People choosing each other in the dark because the alternative was dying alone. Rowan felt something shift inside him, a clarity that cut through years of conditioning and expectation. He'd spent his whole life trying to be the king everyone needed him to be. Maybe it was time to be the person Lyra deserved instead. He was still holding her hand when Marcus approached again. The guard captain looked exhausted but alert. "Your Majesty, we have a situation." "There's always a situation," Rowan said without looking up. "This one's different." Marcus paused. "Some of the aerial guards are waking up, and they're asking to speak with you." Rowan looked up sharply. "Which ones?" "All of them," Marcus said. "Commander Vale included." They'd put the captured guards in a separate chamber deeper in the cave system, under heavy watch. Rowan made his way there with Marcus at his side, his wounded arm throbbing with every step. The guards were awake, all 50 of them, sitting or standing in the confined space with expressions that ranged from confused to hostile. Commander Vale stood at the front, Her armor cracked, but her spine straight. She looked at Rowan with an intensity that felt like being dissected. "You saved us," she said. It wasn't a question. "Lyra saved you," Rowan corrected. "I was just there." "The Moon Queen." Vale's mouth twisted. "Your mother said she was a threat to the kingdom, said she was building an army to overthrow the throne. My mother has said a lot of things." Rowan moved closer. "Doesn't make them true." Vale glanced at the other guards, then back at Rowan. "We felt it. When that light hit us, the corruption trying to take hold, and her power burning it away. She could have let us die. Should have let us die after what we came here to do. But she didn't," Rowan said. "Why?" "Because she's better than the people who hurt her," Rowan said simply. "Because mercy isn't weakness, it's strength. Because she refuses to let fear turn her into a monster." The words hung in the confined space. Vale studied him for a long moment. "The council declared you unfit, removed you from power. As far as the capital is concerned, you're not king anymore." "I know. So what are you?" Rowan thought about it. Thought about the crown he'd worn like a weight around his neck, the throne that had cost him everything that mattered, the title that had required him to betray the one real thing in his life. "Someone trying to fix his mistakes," he said finally. Vale nodded slowly. Then she did something that made every guard in the chamber go still. She knelt. "If you're not king of the capital," she said, "then I guess I'm not sworn to the capital anymore. The Moon Queen saved my life. That means something." One by one, the other aerial guards followed her lead. 50 elite warriors kneeling in the dirt of a cave because they'd seen something worth believing in. Rowan felt his throat tighten. This was what Alara had feared. Not an army built through conquest or politics. Loyalty earned through action. Through choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. Through being worthy of the people who followed you. He looked at Vale. "We're trapped in a cave with a curse outside that's consuming the kingdom. Our supplies won't last a week. The woman who can stop all this is barely conscious and won't be able to fight for days. So if you're swearing loyalty, you need to understand what you're signing up for." Vale smiled grimly. "Sounds like we're all gonna die down here, probably. Then we might as well die for something that matters." She stood, and the other guards rose with her. "What do you need from us?" Rowan made a decision. He turned to Marcus. "How many entrances does this cave system have?" "Just the one we sealed," Marcus said. "Are you sure?" Marcus hesitated. "I scouted what I could, but these tunnels go deep. There might be other ways out." "Then find them," Rowan ordered. "Take Vale and her best scouts. Map every passage, every crack, every possible exit. If there's another way out of here, I need to know about it." "You're planning something," Marcus said. "I'm planning to survive," Rowan corrected, "and to give Lyra time to recover so she can finish what she started." Vale stepped forward. "What about the curse? If we open new passages, we risk letting it in. Then we don't open them until we're ready," Rowan said. "But I need options, because sitting in this cave waiting to die isn't one." Marcus and Vale exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. They started organizing scouting parties immediately, pulling fighters who looked steady enough to navigate the dark tunnels. Rowan watched them go and felt the weight of command settle across his shoulders. It felt different now. Not the crushing pressure of a crown he'd never wanted, but the sharp focus of someone responsible for lives that actually mattered to him. He made his way back to the main chamber where Lyra still lay unconscious. Someone had set up a makeshift infirmary in one corner where the wounded were being tended. Children huddled together near the torches. Fighters checked weapons and whispered strategies. This was his kingdom now. Not marble halls and political chambers, just people trying to survive in the dark. And he'd be damned if he let them down again. He sat beside Lyra and took her hand. Through the bond, he could feel her awareness flickering, rising toward consciousness in fragments. She was fighting her way back. She always had been. "Hold on," he whispered. "Just hold on." The bond pulsed once in response. Then the cave began to shake. Not an earthquake. Something worse. Something deliberate. The curse had found them. Rowan was on his feet immediately, moving toward the sealed entrance where he could hear rocks grinding against each other. The darkness outside was pushing against the barrier they'd created, testing its strength. "How long will it hold?" someone shouted. No one had an answer. The grinding intensified. Dust rained from the ceiling. Fighters moved to defensive positions with weapons drawn, even though everyone knew blades wouldn't stop what was coming. Then a voice cut through the chaos. Move away from the entrance. Rowan spun and saw Lyra standing near the infirmary. She was swaying on her feet and pale as death, but her eyes were clear and focused. Silver light flickered weakly around her hands. "You shouldn't be up," Rowan said. "And you shouldn't be king," Lyra shot back. "Yet here we are." She moved toward the sealed entrance with steps that looked like they might give out any second. Rowan caught up to her and offered his arm for support. She took it without arguing. Together they approached the rockfall. The curse was right outside. Rowan could feel it through the cracks, a presence that was hunger made manifest, corruption given form and purpose. It wanted in, wanted to consume every soul in this cave and add their suffering to its growing mass. "What's the plan?" Rowan asked quietly. Lyra pressed her hand against the rocks. The silver light around her intensified slightly. "I can't fight it," she said. "Not like this. I'm too weak." "Then what? But I can talk to it?" Rowan stared at her. "Talk to the curse?" "It's not mindless," Lyra said. "It's angry, hurt. It was sent here as punishment, but somewhere inside all that darkness is the original purpose. I can feel it through the blessing." "What purpose?" "To force a reckoning," Lyra said, "to make the kingdom remember what it forgot." She turned to look at him, and Rowan saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. "It wants acknowledgement," she continued. "Wants the wolves who exiled the blessed bloodlines to understand what they destroyed. If I can give it that, if I can make it understand that we already know, that we're already paying the price, maybe it'll stop. Or maybe it'll kill you," Rowan said. "Probably," Lyra agreed. "Then don't do it." She smiled sadly. "You don't get to protect me anymore, Rowan. You gave up that right." The words hit him like a blade between the ribs because they were true. He'd made his choice in that throne room, and everything since had been consequences. But looking at her now, about to sacrifice herself for wolves who'd spent years treating her like she was disposable, Rowan made another choice. "Then I'm coming with you," he said. Lyra started to argue, but he cut her off. "I know I don't get to protect you. I know I lost that right. But you're not facing this alone. Not again. Not ever." He pressed his hand against the rocks beside hers. The bond between them flared to life, and silver light merged, amplifying despite their exhaustion. Lyra looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Together?" she said. "Together," Rowan agreed. They pulled on the bond one more time, and the light intensified until it seared through the cracks in the rockfall. The grinding stopped. The cave went silent except for breathing and heartbeats. Then a voice, that wasn't quite a voice, spoke directly into their minds. "Why should I spare you?" It was the curse. Conscious. Aware. Waiting for an answer. Lyra's hand tightened on Rowan's. When she spoke, her voice carried through the bond and into the darkness beyond. "Because we already lost everything," she said. "Because you wanted us to understand what it means to be exiled from divinity, and we do. Because I'm standing here with the blood of the first blessed, and I'm choosing mercy over vengeance, even though vengeance is what I'm owed." The curse considered this. You were cast out, humiliated, hunted. Why would you save them? "Because I'm not them," Lyra said simply. "I'm what they could have been if they hadn't let fear make them cruel. And I refuse to become the monster they accused me of being." The darkness shifted. Rowan could feel its attention turning toward him. "And you?" it asked. "Former king. Man who chose a crown over his mate. Why should you be spared?" Rowan thought about lying, thought about claiming some noble purpose or strategic reasoning. Then he decided to just tell the truth. "I don't deserve to be spared," he said. "I made cowardly choices, and good people suffered for it. But these wolves, the ones who followed Lyra, who chose mercy when they could have chosen revenge, they deserve better than dying in the dark because I was too afraid to do the right thing when it mattered. Prove it." The command slammed into Rowan's mind with physical force. "Prove you've learned. Prove you're not just words." Rowan looked at Lyra. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. He turned back to the darkness and made his final choice. "The crown was a lie," he said. "The throne was built on the blood of wolves my ancestors hunted down because they were afraid of power they couldn't control. My mother spent years trying to keep blessed blood away from the royal line because she knew it would destroy everything the council had built." He pulled harder on the bond with Lyra. "But I'm blessed now. She gave it to me through our mate bond, which means the thing my family feared most has already happened. The old blood is back in the royal line, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it." The darkness went very still. So here's my proof, Rowan continued. I'm renouncing my claim to the capital throne. I'm rejecting the council's authority, and I'm swearing loyalty to the Moon Queen instead, not because she forced me, not because I'm trying to manipulate power, but because she's the only leader I've seen who actually deserves to be followed. He dropped to one knee in front of Lyra. The entire cave went silent. Lyra stared down at him with shock written across her face. Behind them, 200 wolves watched the former Alpha King kneel before the woman he'd exiled. The curse spoke again. You would abandon your birthright? It was never mine, Rowan said. It belonged to people like Lyra, and my family stole it. I'm just giving it back. The darkness began to recede. Slowly at first, then faster, the curse pulled away from the cave entrance. The oppressive weight lifted. The grinding stopped. It was leaving. Rowan looked up at Lyra and saw tears streaming down her face. Not from sadness, from something bigger than either of them could name. Get up, she said quietly. Lyra, get up, she repeated. Her voice cracked. You don't kneel to me, not after everything. Rowan stood but didn't move away. They were close enough now that he could see every detail of her face. The exhaustion, the pain, the fierce determination that had kept her alive when anyone else would have broken. I meant what I said, he told her. You're the queen this kingdom needs. I don't want to be queen, Lyra said. I just want to stop watching people die. Then we stop it together, Rowan said. No crowns, no politics, just two people trying to fix what's broken. Lyra looked at him for a long moment. Then she took his hand. The bond between them blazed to life one more time, but this time it felt different. Not desperate or violent, just steady. Sure, two people choosing each other with their eyes open. Behind them, Marcus cleared his throat. Your Maj... He stopped. What do I call you now? Rowan, he said. Just Rowan. All right then, Rowan. Marcus gestured toward the cave entrance. The curse is gone. We're clear. For how long? No idea. But I found something while scouting. He looked at Lyra. There's a passage about a mile deep that opens onto a plateau. And there's something up there you need to see. What? Marcus's expression was grim. The source. What? They moved through the tunnels with torches and weapons and hearts hammering against ribs. The passage Marcus had found was narrow and steep, forcing them to move single file. Rowan stayed close to Lyra in case she stumbled, but she moved with surprising strength, considering how close she'd come to burning out. The tunnel opened onto a plateau that overlooked the entire northern forest, and there, in the center of the plateau, was the thing that had been sending the shadow curse across the kingdom. It was a throne. Not metaphorical, an actual throne carved from black stone and covered in symbols that matched the ones on Lyra's bond mark. But these symbols were twisted, corrupted, turned inside out. Sitting on that throne was a figure Rowan recognized, even though she should have been impossible. His mother, Queen Regent Alara. Draven sat on the cursed throne with her hands on the armrests and her eyes rolled back in her head. Black veins covered her skin. The shadow curse poured from her in waves, spreading across the land like blood from an open wound. She was the source. Rowan felt his world tilt sideways. No, he whispered. Lyra moved beside him, and her expression went hard as stone. She knew, she said quietly. Your mother knew about the cursed throne, knew it was here, and she used it anyway. Why would she? To destroy what she couldn't control, Lyra said. The blessed bloodlines. The refugees, anyone who represented a threat to her power. She unleashed the curse deliberately. Rowan wanted to deny it, wanted to believe his mother wouldn't doom the entire kingdom just to eliminate a political problem. But looking at her sitting on that throne channeling darkness across the land, he couldn't. This was who she'd always been, someone who'd burn the world rather than share power. We have to stop her, Lyra said. How? Rowan gestured at the curse radiating from the throne. If we get close... I know, Lyra interrupted, but if we don't, the entire kingdom dies. She started walking toward the throne. Rowan grabbed her arm. You can't, you're not strong enough. Lyra looked back at him. Silver light flickered around her like dying stars. Then I guess we'll find out, she said. She pulled free and kept walking, and Rowan followed. Because some things were worth dying for. They crossed the plateau with the curse writhing around them, testing their defenses. The bond between them burned bright enough to keep the darkness at bay, but Rowan could feel it pushing harder with every step. It wanted in. wanted to corrupt them the way it had corrupted Alara. 20 feet from the throne, Lyra collapsed. Rowan caught her before she hit the ground. Her skin was burning and her breathing was shallow, and the silver light around her had faded to almost nothing. She'd used everything. "I can't," she gasped. "Rowan, I can't reach her." "Then I will," Rowan said. He stepped past Lyra toward the throne where his mother sat channeling death across the kingdom. The curse slammed into him immediately. It found every doubt, every fear, every moment of weakness, and amplified them until Rowan could barely remember why he was fighting. The darkness whispered that he'd already failed, that choosing Lyra had doomed the kingdom, that his mother had been right all along. But underneath that was something else. The bond with Lyra, the blessed power she'd shared with him, and his own stubborn refusal to let fear win again. Rowan pushed forward. The curse fought him every step. His vision blurred. His muscles screamed. Blood ran from his nose and his ears rang, and every instinct told him to run. He kept walking. 5 feet from the throne. 4. 3. He reached out toward his mother's corrupted form, and Alara's eyes snapped open. What she said next shattered everything Rowan thought he knew about why he was fighting. Alara's eyes were black from edge to edge. No white, no iris. Just darkness that moved like oil beneath the surface. When she spoke, her voice was layered with something that wasn't quite human anymore. Her words wrapped in the whispers of 1,000 corrupted souls. "You always were weak," she said. "Even now. Even at the end." Rowan stood 3 feet from the cursed throne with his mother's corrupted form radiating malice, and felt something inside him finally, irrevocably break. Not collapse. Break clean, like a bone that had been fractured for years finally snapping and allowing the pieces to settle into a new configuration. He'd spent his entire life trying to earn this woman's approval, trying to be the king she wanted, make the choices she demanded, carry the weight of a legacy built on fear and control. And standing here watching her channel death across the kingdom just to maintain power, Rowan understood with brutal clarity that he'd been chasing something that never existed. His mother had never wanted a son. She'd wanted a puppet, and he was done dancing on her strings. "I know what you did," Rowan said. His voice was steady despite the curse pressing against him from all sides. "You found the cursed throne, learned it could be used to destroy the blessed bloodlines, and you unleashed it anyway." Alara's corrupted smile was terrible to see. The blessed were always going to be a problem. Better to remove them permanently than wait for them to remember what they were. "You killed thousands of innocent wolves." "There are no innocent wolves," Alara said. "Only the strong who take power, and the weak who deserve to lose it. I taught you that." "No," Rowan said. "You tried to, but I learned something different." He took another step forward. The curse slammed into him harder, trying to find purchase in his mind. But the blessed power Lyra had shared with him burned through the darkness like silver fire through shadow. "I learned that real strength isn't about domination," Rowan continued. "It's about knowing when to let go. Real power isn't controlling everything. It's trusting the people around you to be better than your worst fears. You never understood that. You just kept squeezing tighter and tighter until everyone around you either broke or ran." "Sentiment," Alara spat. "Weakness dressed up as philosophy." "Then why are you sitting on a cursed throne channeling corruption across the kingdom?" Rowan moved closer still. "Why are you so terrified of blessed wolves that you'd rather destroy everything than share power? That's not strength, Mother. That's cowardice." Alara lunged. She moved faster than anything human should, the curse amplifying her physical abilities beyond normal limits. Her hand closed around Rowan's throat and lifted him off his feet. The darkness poured into him through the contact, seeking his heart, his mind, everything that made him who he was. For a moment, Rowan felt himself slipping. The curse was inside him now, whispering that his mother was right, that sentiment was weakness, that the only way to survive was to become as ruthless as the world that tried to break you. Then he felt Lyra through the bond. She was barely conscious, lying on the plateau where she'd collapsed, but she was pulling on their connection with everything she had left. Silver light flowed through the bond and into Rowan's chest, burning away the corruption before it could take hold. The combined power of their bond, blessed blood meeting blessed blood, true mates choosing each other despite every reason not to, was stronger than anything his mother could channel. Rowan grabbed his mother's wrist and pulled her hand away from his throat. The silver light intensified until it blazed from his skin like he'd swallowed the moon itself. I'm not fighting you, he said. His voice echoed with divine resonance. I'm saving you. He placed his other hand on his mother's chest, directly over her heart, and released every ounce of blessed power he could draw through the bond with Lyra. The light exploded outward. It slammed into Alara's corrupted form, and the curse thrown beneath her simultaneously. The darkness shrieked, an actual audible sound of rage and agony as divine power tore through it. Symbols carved into the black stone began to crack and shatter. The curse that had been spreading across the kingdom recoiled like a living thing struck in its heart. Alara's eyes cleared for just a moment. The black receded, and Rowan saw his mother, the real woman beneath the corruption, staring at him with an expression of pure shock. "You would save me?" she whispered. "After everything I did to you? To her?" Rowan met her gaze steadily. "Because someone needs to break the cycle. Someone needs to be better than what came before. Might as well be me." The throne beneath Alara shattered completely. She fell, and Rowan caught her, lowering her to the ground as gently as he could. The corruption was burning out of her system in waves, black veins receding beneath her skin. It was painful. He could see it in the way her body convulsed. But it was working. The curse was being expelled. Behind him, Rowan heard movement. Lyra had somehow found the strength to stand and was making her way across the plateau. Every step looked like it might be her last, but she kept coming, drawn by the same stubborn refusal to quit that had kept her alive through exile and hunters, and every attempt to destroy her. She reached them and dropped to her knees beside Rowan. Her hands joined his on Alara's chest, and more silver light poured forth. The combined power of two blessed wolves working in perfect synchronization was devastating to the corruption. The last of the curse fled Alara's body and dissipated into nothing. Silence fell across the plateau. In the distance, Rowan could feel the shadow that had been consuming the kingdom starting to recede. Without its source, without the curse throne channeling it, the corruption was losing cohesion. It would take time to fully disperse, but the worst was over. They'd won. Alara lay between them, breathing shallowly, her skin pale and clammy but clear of the black veins. Her eyes found Rowan's, and for the first time in his memory, she looked afraid. "I was trying to protect the kingdom," she said weakly. "The blessed bloodlines, they would have destroyed everything we built." "You mean everything you controlled?" Lyra said quietly. "There's a difference." Alara's gaze shifted to her. "The girl I tried to exile. The unworthy Luna." Lyra's expression was unreadable. "I was never unworthy. You were just threatened by anything you couldn't dominate." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Alara closed her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "I spent my entire life afraid. Afraid of being overthrown. Afraid of losing power. Afraid of anything I couldn't predict or control. And that fear turned me into exactly the kind of monster I thought I was preventing." It was the closest thing to an apology Rowan had ever heard from his mother. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough to make up for the lives lost, the suffering inflicted, the kingdom nearly destroyed. But it was honest, and sometimes honesty was the only foundation you had to build on. Rowan looked at Lyra. "What do we do with her?" Lyra was quiet for a long moment, then she stood, swaying slightly, and looked down at the woman who'd tried to have her killed. "We let the kingdom decide," she said. "We take her back to the capital, we tell everyone what she did, and we let the wolves she ruled over determine what justice looks like." "That could mean execution," Rowan said. "I know," Lyra said, "but that's not my choice to make. I'm not interested in being a tyrant, even a merciful one. If we're actually going to build something different, it has to start with accountability." She turned and started walking back toward the cave where 200 wolves waited for news. Rowan watched her go and felt something like pride swell in his chest. She was right. Of course she was right. Real change didn't come from one person making all the decisions. It came from giving power back to the people who'd been denied it. He looked down at his mother. "Can you walk?" Alara nodded weakly. Rowan helped her to her feet and supported her weight as they followed Lyra back across the plateau. Behind them, the shattered cursed throne lay in pieces. The symbols carved into the black stone were dark and lifeless now, their power spent. Whatever ancient force had created it was gone, dispelled by blessed light and the stubborn refusal of two people to let fear win. The northern forest would reclaim this place eventually, turn it back into wilderness, bury the evidence of humanity's worst impulses beneath new growth. That seemed appropriate somehow. The journey back to the capital took 2 weeks. Word had spread fast. The shadow curse was receding. Corrupted wolves were waking up clear-eyed and confused. Packs that had been lost to the darkness were stumbling back to their territories with no memory of what they'd done while infected. The kingdom was healing. But healing wasn't the same as healed. Rowan walked beside Lyra at the head of their growing procession. What had started as 200 refugees and soldiers had swelled to nearly 1,000 as they moved south. Wolves who'd fled the corruption, packs who'd heard about the Moon Queen and wanted to see if the stories were true, soldiers who'd been sent to hunt Lyra and chose to follow her instead. It wasn't an army, it was a movement. Elara walked with them under guard. She was weak still, recovering from the toll the cursed throne had taken on her body. But she was lucid, and she was terrified. She kept glancing at the wolves around them, wolves she'd sent to die, wolves she'd exiled, wolves who'd lost everything because of her choices, and Rowan could see the weight of it crushing her. Good, some small vicious part of him thought. Let her understand what she did. But mostly, he just felt tired. He'd spent so much energy being angry at his mother, resenting her control, fighting against the legacy she represented. And now that it was over, now that she was stripped of power and facing consequences, the anger felt hollow. What was left underneath was just sadness for the person she could have been if fear hadn't turned her cruel. Marcus rode up beside them on horseback. "Your Majesty." "Just Rowan," he said for the 100th time. Marcus grinned. "Right. Rowan, scouts report we'll reach the capital by nightfall. The council is waiting at the gates." "Of course they are," Lyra said, "probably trying to figure out which way the wind is blowing." Marcus sobered. "They know you're coming, know you've got 1,000 wolves at your back. Some of them are scared you're here to take the throne by force." "Are we?" Rowan looked at Lyra. She met his gaze. "I told you. I'm not interested in ruling. I just want to make sure this never happens again." "Then what's the plan?" Lyra was quiet for a moment, watching the road ahead. "We tell the truth. All of it. What your mother did. What the council allowed. What the kingdom lost because the people in power were too afraid to share it. And then we let the wolves decide what comes next." "That's idealistic," Marcus pointed out. "So was thinking a common wolf and an exiled king could survive in the northern forest," Lyra said. "Sometimes idealism is just reality waiting to happen." They reached the capital as the sun was setting. The gates stood open and the entire council was assembled on the steps of the palace. Lords and ladies in their formal robes, looking exactly as Rowan remembered, polished, powerful, completely divorced from the reality most wolves lived every day. Princess Mira stood among them, his political wife, the alliance he'd chosen over Lyra. She looked tired, relieved to see him alive, but tired. The procession came to a halt in the main square. 1,000 wolves filled the space that usually held formal ceremonies and military parades. They were muddy and battle-worn and absolutely silent as they waited to see what would happen next. Councillor Theron stepped forward. He was the eldest, the one who'd been on the council longer than anyone could remember. His voice carried across the square with practiced authority. "Alpha King Rowan Draven, you were declared unfit to rule and your authority was revoked. Yet you return with an army at your back and the woman we exiled beside you. Explain yourself." Rowan stepped forward. Lyra moved with him, standing at his shoulder like she'd done 100 times during their year together in the palace. The bond between them pulsed steadily, grounding him. "I'm not here to reclaim the throne," Rowan said. His voice was calm, conversational, but it carried. "I'm here to tell you what actually happened while you were safe behind your walls." He told them everything, about the cursed throne his mother had found and used to eliminate the blessed bloodline she feared, about the thousands of wolves who died because Elara was too afraid to share power, about the refugees who'd survived only because Lyra chose mercy over the revenge she'd earned, about the aerial guard who'd been sent to kill her and instead swore loyalty because they'd seen what real leadership looked like. He didn't spare his mother, didn't spare himself, didn't spare the council who'd enabled all of it by choosing political convenience over truth. When he finished, the square was so quiet you could hear individual heartbeats. Councillor Theron's face had gone ashen. Queen Regent Elara did this? Used forbidden power to— "She's right here," Rowan interrupted. He gestured and the guards brought Elara forward. "Ask her yourself." Elara stood before the council that had obeyed her for decades. She looked small suddenly, stripped of the presence that had made her so terrifying. When she spoke, her voice was steady but hollow. "Everything he said is true. I found the cursed throne 20 years ago. I kept it secret. And when I realized the blessed bloodlines were awakening, when I saw what Lyra represented, I used it to eliminate the threat before it could challenge our authority. The council erupted into chaos. Nobles shouting over each other, demanding explanations, declaring they'd known nothing about this. Princess Mira stood silent through it all, her expression unreadable. Rowan let them yell for a minute. Then he raised his hand and the square went quiet again. The question isn't what she did, he said. The question is what we do now. Do we execute her and pretend that solves the problem? Do we exile her the way she exiled Lyra? Or do we do something different? He looked at the 1,000 wolves filling the square. These were the people who'd actually suffered, who'd lost homes, families, futures because of decisions made by nobles safe in their palace. I think they should decide, Rowan said. Not the council. Not me. The wolves whose lives were destroyed by our politics. Let them determine what justice looks like. You can't be serious, Councillor Theron said. You'd let common wolves determine the fate of the Queen Regent? I'd let the people she hurt have a voice in what happens next, Rowan corrected. Radical concept, I know. Lyra stepped forward then. Her presence cut through the noise like a blade. I was exiled by this council, she said, stripped of my title and hunted through the forest. If anyone has the right to demand Alara's death, it's me. The square held its breath. But I'm not interested in revenge, Lyra continued. I'm interested in making sure this never happens again. So here's what I propose. We disband the council as it currently exists. We create a new governing body that includes representatives from every major pack, not just the noble houses, but the common wolves too. People who actually understand what life is like outside these palace walls. That's chaos, someone shouted from the council. That's accountability, Lyra shot back. You've been making decisions for people you don't understand and don't care about. Time to let them speak for themselves. And what about you? Councillor Theron demanded. You return with an army. You have the blessed power. You could take the throne by force and no one could stop you. Lyra smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. I could, she agreed. But I don't want it. I never wanted to rule. I just wanted to be treated like I mattered, like the wolves outside your walls mattered. She turned to face the crowd. I'm not your queen, she called. I'm just someone who survived what they tried to do to me and came back to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. You want a voice in how this kingdom is run? Then speak up. Vote. Choose representatives you actually trust. Build something better than what came before. The silence that followed was different, not empty but full, pregnant with possibility. Then a wolf near the back shouted, I vote for Lyra Vale. Another voice joined. The Moon Queen. Within seconds, the entire square was chanting, not because Lyra had demanded it or manipulated them, but because they'd seen her choose mercy when she could have chosen violence. And that meant something. Lyra raised her hands, and the crowd quieted. I told you, she said. I'm not interested in being queen, but I'll serve on the new council if you want. I'll help build something that actually represents you, and I'll make sure the people in power remember what happens when they forget who they're supposed to serve. She looked at Rowan. Both of us will. Rowan felt something settle in his chest. This was it. The thing he'd been searching for without knowing it. Not a throne or a crown or political power, just the chance to actually help people instead of managing them. He turned to the old council. I'm formally renouncing my claim to the throne, he said. I'll serve as an advisor if the new council wants me, but I'm done being king. Councillor Theron looked like he'd been struck. You can't. I just did, Rowan interrupted. The crown passes to whoever the people choose. Could be Princess Mira. Could be someone completely different. That's not my decision anymore. He looked at Mira. She'd been standing silently through all of this, watching the kingdom she'd been brought in to help stabilize fall apart and rebuild itself in real time. I never wanted this either, she said quietly. I was brought here to seal an alliance, to be a political tool. If the council is dissolving, so is our marriage treaty. She pulled off the silver circlet, the one that had been Lyra's before it was hers, and held it out. This belongs to someone else anyway. Lyra walked up the palace steps and took the circlet. For a moment, she just looked at it. Then she turned and threw it into the crowd. A young wolf caught it, maybe 15, ragged from corruption recovery but clear-eyed. He stared at the silver in his hands like he'd caught a falling star. Sell it, Lyra told him. Feed your family. Pay for medicine. Do something useful with it, instead of using it to make one person feel important. The square erupted in cheers. They held the first vote 3 days later. Every major pack sent representatives. Common wolves who'd never set foot in the palace before stood beside noble houses and debated the future of the kingdom. It was messy, chaotic, full of arguments and compromises, and moments where it seemed like the whole thing would collapse. It was the most honest thing Rowan had ever seen. In the end, they created a council of 12. 6 seats for noble houses, 6 for common packs. Lyra was elected unanimously to one of the common seats. Rowan was offered an advisory position and accepted. Alara was tried before the full assembly. The vote was close. Execution lost by only 8 votes. But ultimately they chose exile. She would be sent to the northern forest with supplies and left to survive on her own, the way she'd sentenced Lyra to die. Rowan visited her the night before she left. She was being held in a tower room that had once been a guest chamber. Now it was a prison with comfortable furniture. She stood by the window looking out at the city she'd ruled for decades. "I thought you'd want me dead," she said without turning around. "Part of me does," Rowan admitted, "but a bigger part just wants you to understand what you did." "I understand," Alara said quietly. "I destroyed everything trying to protect it." "Why?" Rowan moved closer. "Why was control so important that you'd kill thousands to maintain it?" His mother was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was hollow with old pain. "Because I was terrified of being powerless again." She turned to face him. "Your father was supposed to be a partnership, but the moment we bonded, he stopped seeing me as an equal, started making decisions without me, treating me like an ornament instead of a partner. And when I objected, when I tried to maintain my own authority, he reminded me that I was Luna, not Alpha, that my role was to support, not lead." She looked away. "So when he died and I finally had real power, I swore I'd never give it up. Never let anyone reduce me to something decorative again. And that fear, that absolute terror of being powerless, it poisoned everything." Rowan felt something shift in his understanding of his mother. She was still responsible for her choices, still guilty of atrocities. But underneath the cruelty was a wound he recognized, the fear of being controlled by someone who was supposed to love you. "I'm sorry Father did that to you," Rowan said, "but you did the same thing to me, tried to control every aspect of my life. Turned me into your puppet." "I know," Alara said. "I became exactly what I hated." The bitter laugh that escaped her was painful to hear. Funny how that works. Rowan looked at the woman who'd shaped his entire life through fear and manipulation and political calculation. She was smaller now, older, hollowed out by consequences. Human in a way she'd never allowed herself to be when she had power. He couldn't forgive her. Not fully. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But he could understand her. And sometimes understanding was enough to stop the cycle of cruelty before it continued. "I hope you survive," he said. "Not because you deserve it, but because someone needs to remember what happens when fear makes the decisions." Alara met his gaze. Her eyes were wet, but no tears fell. "Take care of her," she said. "The girl you exiled. She's stronger than both of us." "I know," Rowan said. He left without looking back. 2 months after the new council formed, Rowan found Lyra standing on the palace balcony watching the sunrise. She looked different now. Not in appearance, though the haunted look had faded from her eyes, but in presence. She'd settled into herself in a way that made her seem simultaneously more powerful and more at peace. The bond between them pulsed steadily. It had been healing, growing stronger as they worked side by side to rebuild what had been broken. But they hadn't talked about what they were to each other, hadn't addressed the elephant that lived in the space between them. Rowan joined her at the railing. The city spread below them, slowly recovering from the curse. Buildings being repaired, markets reopening, life returning. "We did it," he said. "We started it," Lyra corrected. "Building something better is going to take years." "Yeah." They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Lyra spoke without looking at him. "I've been thinking about leaving." Rowan's heart stopped. "What?" "Not permanently," she clarified. "Just for a while. There are packs in the outer territories that need help recovering. Wolves who are still dealing with corruption effects. I could do more good out there than sitting in council chambers." "You're running," Rowan said quietly. "Maybe," Lyra admitted. "Being here, being near you, it's complicated. Because of what I did. Because I don't know how to trust you again." She finally looked at him. You broke something, Rowan, and I know you've spent every day since trying to fix it. I know you're different now. I know you chose me when it mattered. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. Rowan felt the words land like blades, but forced himself to hear them. What do you need? Time, Lyra said. Space. The chance to figure out who I am without constantly being reminded of who I was when I stood in that throne room and lost everything. And us? Lyra touched the bond mark on her wrist. The silver crescent still glowed faintly, permanent proof of what they'd been to each other. We're always going to be us, she said. True mates don't just stop being connected. But whether that connection is something I want to build a life around, I don't know yet. The honesty hurt, but Rowan respected her for it. She wasn't offering false hope or easy forgiveness. She was being real. How long? As long as it takes, Lyra said. Could be months. Could be years. Could be forever. I'll wait, Rowan said immediately. That's not fair to you. I don't care about fair. Rowan moved closer until they were side by side at the railing. I care about you, and if waiting is what you need, then I'll wait. I'll be here when you come back, if you come back, working to build something worth coming back to. Lyra's hand found his. Their fingers intertwined, and the bond blazed bright enough that silver light spilled from the point of contact. You really mean that, she said. It wasn't a question. Every word. She leaned her head against his shoulder. It was the first real physical affection she'd offered since the exile, and Rowan felt his throat tighten. I want to trust you again, she whispered. I want to believe this is real, but I need to be sure. For both of us. Then go, Rowan said. Find that certainty. I'll be here. They stood together watching the sun rise over a kingdom they'd saved and nearly died for, connected by a bond that had been broken and rebuilt and was still finding its shape. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was an honest one. And sometimes honesty was the only foundation strong enough to build forever on. Although Lyra left a week later, she rode out of the capital with a small group of healers and fighters, heading toward the outer territories where corruption still lingered. Rowan watched from the same balcony where they'd talked, his hand pressed against the bond mark that connected them across distance. He could feel her moving farther away, could sense her determination and fear and the fragile hope that maybe, eventually, she could be whole again. Marcus appeared beside him. Think she'll come back? I don't know, Rowan said honestly. And if she doesn't? Rowan was quiet for a long moment, feeling the bond pulse steadily despite the growing distance. Then I'll have spent my life building a kingdom worthy of her anyway, he said. There are worse ways to live. Marcus smiled slightly. You really have changed. Yeah, Rowan said. He looked down at the city. His responsibility, his chance to do something that actually mattered. Turns out losing everything you thought you wanted is a hell of a teacher. He turned from the balcony and headed inside. There was work to do. Always work to do. The new council needed guidance navigating the politics of actual representation. The outer territories needed resources. The kingdom needed to remember it was made of people, not property. Rowan threw himself into it with the same intensity he'd once reserved for trying to please his mother. But this was different. This was purpose instead of obligation. This was choosing to serve instead of being forced to rule. This was the man he'd needed to become. 3 years passed. The kingdom transformed. The new council system wasn't perfect. Nothing involving people ever was. But it was functional. Common wolves had genuine representation. The blessed bloodlines were acknowledged instead of feared. The old power structures that had crushed anything different were dismantled piece by piece. Rowan worked alongside the council as an advisor, using his knowledge of the old system to help build something better. He traveled to outer territories, helped mediate disputes, and generally made himself useful instead of ornamental. He didn't remarry, didn't even consider it. The bond with Lyra remained, a constant presence in his chest that reminded him what he was working toward. She'd returned to the capital exactly twice in 3 years. Once to testify at a corruption trial, once to attend the memorial for wolves lost to the curse. Both times she'd been polite, professional, and gone before Rowan could do more than exchange pleasantries. It hurt. Every time. But he'd meant what he said about waiting. Then on a spring morning, during his 4th year of building something better, Rowan woke to find the bond blazing with an intensity it hadn't held since the battle at the Cursed Throne. Lyra was coming home. He felt her getting closer throughout the day. Felt her pause at the city gates. Felt her uncertainty and determination warring in her chest. Felt the moment she made the decision to keep moving forward. By sunset, she was standing in the palace courtyard. Rowan met her at the entrance. She looked different, leaner, harder, with new scars and weathered skin that spoke of years spent in rough territory. But her eyes were clear, certain, whole in a way they hadn't been when she left. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Rowan said back. They stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Then Lyra laughed, a real laugh, bright and genuine. "This is stupid," she said. "We've been connected by a divine bond for 4 years, and we're acting like strangers." "You left," Rowan pointed out gently. "You needed to." "I did," Lyra agreed, "and now I'm back. If you'll have me." Rowan's heart was hammering so hard he thought his ribs might crack. "What changed?" "I did," Lyra said simply. "I spent 3 years helping wolves rebuild their lives in territories that had been destroyed. I learned who I am when I'm not defined by what was done to me. And I figured out that being whole doesn't mean forgetting what broke me. It means choosing not to let that breaking define everything that comes after." She moved closer. "You were right to wait," she continued. "I wasn't ready, but I am now. I've done the work, faced the anger and the hurt and the fear, and at the end of all that, I still came back to you." "Why?" "Because the bond was trying to tell us something when it formed," Lyra said. "Because true mates aren't random. Because you spent 4 years building exactly the kind of kingdom I was trying to protect when I was healing wolves in the wilderness. Because I trust you now in a way I couldn't before." She took his hand. The bond mark on both their wrists blazed silver. "Because I love you," she said. "Still. Again. Always. And I'm tired of pretending that's a weakness instead of the strongest thing about me." Rowan pulled her into his arms and felt something that had been fractured for 4 years finally, completely heal. Not reset to what it was before. That version had been built on assumptions and political convenience. This was new, tested, real. "I love you too," he said against her hair. Never stopped. They stood together in the courtyard while the sun set over a kingdom they'd saved and rebuilt, and finally, truly made their own. The bond between them sang with certainty and hard-won trust. It wasn't the fairy tale ending people told in stories. It was better, because it was earned. 6 months later, they held the bonding ceremony again. Not in the throne room this time, in the main square, surrounded by thousands of wolves from every pack and territory. Common wolves and noble houses standing side by side. Representatives from the new council, refugees who'd survived the curse, soldiers who'd chosen Lyra over politics. Marcus stood as witness. Princess Mira attended as an honored guest, now ruling her own kingdom with the lessons she'd learned here. Even some of the old council members who'd adapted to the new system were present. Commander Vale and her aerial guard formed an honor guard, their loyalty to Lyra absolute. Rowan stood in the center of it all, watching Lyra walk toward him, and felt his chest might explode from the weight of what this moment meant. She was dressed simply. No crown, no ceremonial robes, just leather and linen and the silver crescent bond mark glowing on her wrist. She was perfect. When she reached him, she took both his hands. The crowd went silent. "I'm not here to be your Luna," she said. Her voice carried across the square. "I'm here to be your partner, your equal. Someone who will fight beside you, challenge you, and call you out when you're being an idiot." "Sounds about right," Rowan said, and the crowd laughed. Lyra smiled. "I'm also here to make sure this kingdom remembers what happens when power becomes more important than people, when control matters more than compassion, when fear makes the decisions instead of hope." She looked out at the assembled wolves. "We almost destroyed ourselves," she said. "We let ancient fears and political calculations corrupt everything that should have mattered. And it took a curse and a war and too many deaths to remind us that strength isn't about domination, it's about choosing each other even when it's hard." Her gaze returned to Rowan. "So I'm choosing you," she said. Again, with my eyes open, with full knowledge of what we've been through and what we survived and what we built from the ruins. "I'm choosing us." Rowan felt tears burning in his eyes, but didn't bother hiding them. "I spent my whole life being what everyone else needed," he said, "trying to fit into shapes that were never mine. And it took losing you to understand that the only person I needed to be was someone worthy of standing beside you." He squeezed her hands. "So I'm choosing you too," he continued. "Not because a bond says we're meant to be together. Not because it's politically convenient or strategically sound, but because you're the strongest, most stubborn, most beautiful person I've ever known. and I want to spend the rest of my life earning the trust you're giving me." The bond between them blazed bright enough to illuminate the entire square. Lyra leaned up and kissed him, and the crowd erupted into cheers that shook the palace walls. When they finally broke apart, Lyra was smiling with tears streaming down her face. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we build," Rowan said. "Together." "Together," Lyra agreed. They turned to face the kingdom they'd saved and broken and rebuilt into something worth believing in. The crowd was cheering. The sun was setting. The bond between them pulsed with absolute certainty. There would be challenges ahead, always challenges. The work of building something better never truly ended. But they'd face it side by side. Two people who'd been thrown away and came back blazing. Two blessed wolves who'd remembered what real power looked like. Two souls who'd chosen each other despite every reason not to, and because of that choice, changed everything. The woman they'd called unworthy stood beside the king who'd exiled her, and together they ruled not through fear or control, but through the radical act of giving a damn. It wasn't the ending anyone expected. It was the one they deserved. And as the silver moon rose over the capital, blessing the bond between them with light that would never fade, Rowan and Lyra understood the truth that had been trying to reach them from the beginning. Real strength wasn't about power. It was about choosing love, even when love had every reason to walk away. It was about rebuilding trust one day at a time. It was about being brave enough to be whole. And in a kingdom that had almost destroyed itself chasing control, that kind of strength was revolutionary. The moon blessed them both. And the story of the unworthy Luna, who became the Moon Queen, passed into legend, not as a fairy tale, but as a reminder. That mercy is stronger than vengeance, that trust earned is worth more than power taken, that the people you throw away might just be the ones who save you, and that sometimes the greatest act of leadership is knowing when to let go and let others rise. The kingdom rebuilt itself in their image, not perfect, never perfect, but honest, and trying, and better than what came before. And in the end, that was enough.